Harry Potter and the White Wizard. Chapter 1. The Dream. The dream transported Harry to a barren landscape beneath a sky devoid of stars. Before him, a mountain ablaze with fire dominated the horizon, its flames casting an ominous glow on the surroundings. The sight was terrifying. Amidst the fiery roar of enormous black dragons and the poisonous fumes of darkness, figures emerged cloaked in black, flying dreadful scaled bird-like creatures, emanating a dread far surpassing any Dementor's chill as they silently circled the mountain. In this dream, two figures caught Harry's attention. One was a tall, old man with a flowing white beard and robes that shimmered in the red light of the fires below, standing like an ancient, mighty king upon the edge of doom. Next to him was a smaller figure, terror upon his face frozen where he stood in fear. In a moment that chilled Harry to the bone, the tall figure lifted the smaller one, casting him into the fiery mountain. As the scene shifted, Harry found himself in a village of small, jovial beings, their laughter a stark contrast to the previous scene. They lived in peace, untouched by the darkness of the mountain, finding delight in cultivating their gardens, enjoying leisurely strolls along winding paths, and gathering for cheerful parties in cozy homes built within hills. But the dream took a final, unsettling turn. Harry saw a figure emerging from the shadows, a man with a bald head and the snake-like features of Lord Voldemort. The sight jolted Harry. The Voldemort he knew had long, straight white hair, a stark contrast to the bald figure before him. The strangeness was deeply disconcerting, leaving Harry with a sense of confusion. As the vision of the bald Voldemort loomed in his mind, Harry's dream abruptly ended. He was jolted awake by Ron shaking him violently. "Harry, wake up. We're going to be late for Slughorn's class," Ron shouted. Harry's eyes snapped open, his breath coming in short gasps. He was drenched in sweat, the remnants of the nightmare still clinging to him. The vivid images from his dream, the fiery mountain, the mysterious figures, and the chilling appearance of a bald Voldemort lingered in his mind. "What time is it?" he stammered, his heart still racing. "It's nearly time for potions, mate. You were thrashing around in your sleep. Bad dream?" Ron asked, looking concerned as he took in Harry's disheveled appearance. Harry nodded. "Yeah, a really weird one. But I'll tell you about it later. We need to hurry." Scrambling out of bed, Harry quickly pulled on his robes and together, he and Ron dashed out of the dormitory, making their way through the corridors of Hogwarts. As they hurried to Professor Slughorn's classroom, Harry's mind was still racing with questions about his dream. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The threat of Voldemort had been growing ever since his return had been witnessed at the Ministry. Since then, there had been an increase in attacks as close as Hogsmeade, and the entire wizarding community had been in a panic with fear of inevitably losing the war. Harry, Ron, and Hermione put away their things as the bells sounded, signaling the end of their potions class. It had been another major triumph for Harry, as he once again managed to impress Professor Slughorn with a perfectly brewed dream-enhancing potion. His success due to the useful notes scribbled in the margins of his Half-Blood Prince Potions book. Hermione looked down at the book in disgust. He knew full well she considered his advantage nothing short of cheating. He looked at the mysterious handwriting again that had led him through one tough potion after another, feeling thankful and curious about the unknown Half-Blood Prince. The Great Hall buzzed with the usual chatter and clatter of lunchtime as students filled their plates from the magically replenished dishes. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat together, discussing Harry's peculiar dream and the significance it could hold. "I'm telling you, Hermione, it was like I was actually there. It felt real." "But what do you think it means?" "I don't know, but whatever it is, I doubt it's good. You have to tell Professor Dumbledore about it." "No, he's already got enough on his plate." As they finished their meal, a hush fell over the hall. All eyes turned to the staff table where Professor Dumbledore had stood up, his expression grave. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath, expecting the worst as they had become accustomed in these dark times. "My dear students," Dumbledore began, his voice carrying through the hall. "As you are all aware, the news of current events outside our walls is grave. The threat from Voldemort and his supporters is growing, and our priority must always remain your safety and well-being." A murmur ran through the students. The mention of Voldemort's name still had the power to unsettle, despite Dumbledore's calm demeanor. "Therefore," Dumbledore continued, "we are making some changes to our staff to ensure the security of Hogwarts and to provide you with the best possible education in these trying times." Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged foreboding glances, wondering what new disaster Dumbledore was about to unleash now. Professor Slughorn, who has generously shared his knowledge and expertise with us this year, will be leaving us, Dumbledore announced, gesturing towards Slughorn, who nodded solemnly to the students. A ripple of surprise and murmurs swept through the hall. Slughorn had been a popular figure despite his eccentricities. He waved from the top table, acknowledging the sounds of disappointments from small pockets around the hall. To replace him, Professor Snape will be returning to his role as the Master of Potions, Dumbledore said, indicating Snape, whose expression remained inscrutable. The murmurs grew louder. Snape returning to potions was unexpected, but not entirely surprising. And to fill the role of defense against the dark arts teacher, Dumbledore paused for dramatic effect. We will be welcoming a new member to our faculty. This exceptional individual will no doubt be an invaluable addition in these times. The hall erupted in whispers and speculation. The defense against the dark arts position was notorious for its high turnover, and the identity of the new professor was a topic of immediate interest. The Great Hall, abuzz with speculation and hushed conversations, fell silent as the doors swung open with a dramatic flourish. All heads turned to see the thin figure making its entrance. In strode an elderly man, his long white hair dropping down to his waist, and his attire was of a pure, dazzling white, complemented by a long staff that seemed to radiate an aura of power. Harry's eyes widened in shock. That's him. The man from my dream. I saw him throwing a child into a fire, he whispered in disbelief. Ron and Hermione turned to him with confused expressions. What? Hermione asked, her brow furrowed. Before Harry could respond, Dumbledore rose from his seat, his face alight with a welcoming smile. Ah, Professor, you're earlier than we expected, he said, his voice resonating excitedly through the hall. The old man stopped before the high table, his eyes scanning the room with a sharp, penetrating gaze. A wizard is never late, nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to, responded the stranger in a voice both raspy and mysterious, his words perceptibly carrying more depth and authority than those of their own headmaster. Wow, he makes Dumbledore seem young, said Ron sheepishly. The students, staff, and even the ghosts of Hogwarts looked on in fascination as Dumbledore gestured for the newcomer to join them at the staff table. The atmosphere in the Great Hall was electric with curiosity and apprehension. Who was this mysterious new figure, and what did his arrival mean for Hogwarts? After exchanging a few words with the newcomer, Dumbledore turned once again to the hall. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Gandalf, who joins us from distant lands, he announced. I am confident he will bring a wealth of knowledge and experience that you will all profit greatly from, announced Dumbledore before once again resuming his seat. From the corner of his eye, Harry noticed Snape's expression. It was one of barely concealed disdain. Ron, following Harry's gaze, leaned in and whispered, "He doesn't look very happy." Well, he's just lost the job he waited over a decade for. I'm not surprised, responded Hermione in a low voice, her eyes fixed on Snape. Turning back to the staff table, Harry's attention was drawn to Professor Gandalf, who had produced a long smoking pipe and was in the process of lighting it. Professor McGonagall, sitting beside him, wore a look of mild disapproval, her lips pursed in a silent reprimand. "Gandalf? I've never heard of him." "Have you, Hermione?" Harry asked. "No, I don't think so," replied Hermione, her brow furrowed in thought. "He doesn't appear in any of the books I've read." As the three of them watched, Professor Gandalf took a deep puff from his pipe, sending a small cloud of smoke into the air. The sight was so out of place in the Great Hall that the entire hall looked on in silence, transfixed. "We'd better go before we're late for class," Hermione said finally, breaking the spell of the moment. The trio stood up, still exchanging speculative glances and theories about their new professor. As they made their way out of the Great Hall, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that Professor Gandalf's arrival was more significant than a simple staff change. "Don't forget you have your lesson with Dumbledore this evening, Harry," Hermione reminded. Harry nodded. "I'll see you both later." Later that evening, as his lesson with Dumbledore drew to a close, both headmaster and students sat across from one another at opposing ends of his enormous desk, discussing the significance of the most recent memory Dumbledore had managed to procure. "Well, Harry, I think that's enough for today. It is enough to understand that Voldemort split his soul into multiple pieces and hid those pieces. We'll continue where we left off next time," smiled Dumbledore. "Off to bed now." But Harry couldn't resist asking the burning question on his mind. "Professor, I have a question." "Yes, Harry." "Who is Professor Gandalf?" Dumbledore paused, his fingers forming a triangle in front of him as he regarded Harry over the top of his glasses. His eyes seemed to delve into a deeper, more distant place. "Professor Gandalf," he began slowly, "is a bit of an enigma, even to myself, I must admit. He applied for the role of defense against the dark arts teacher, and due to the lack of alternative candidates, one of whom was on the register, I had no choice but to accept. But who is he, Professor? I've never heard of him." Dumbledore again paused before responding. "It is not my place to say, Harry. You have your first lesson with him tomorrow, I believe. Perhaps you can ask him yourself." Harry nodded. It was clear Dumbledore would say no more on the matter. "Is there anything else you'd like to talk about, Harry?" Harry hesitated for a moment, wondering whether he should tell Dumbledore about his dream, but decided against it. "No, Professor." "Off to bed, then. Tomorrow awaits." Harry Potter and the Elder Wizard, Chapter 2, Gandalf the White. The arrival of Professor Gandalf at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry set the ancient school abuzz with whispers and excitement. For Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the curiosity was almost unbearable, but they wouldn't have to wait long for answers. Their first class that morning was with Professor Gandalf, and 15 minutes later, they found themselves quietly filed into his classroom, where the mysterious old wizard sat at his desk holding a crystal ball in one hand, a calm, almost serene expression on his face beneath his incredibly bushy eyebrows. The room hushed as he stood up. "Greetings, young students of Hogwarts." Gandalf's voice vibrated through the room, causing the hairs on the back of their necks to stand up. His voice had an ancient depth to it, like a valley of time filled with all the ages of the world gone by and the echoes of battles fought. "I come to share with you the knowledge and wisdom I have gathered throughout my long life and journeys in Middle-earth and the Undying Lands." The students, including Harry, Ron, and Hermione, leaned forward, pulled in by his presence. Gandalf's mention of Middle-earth and Undying Lands sparked a wave of murmurs and exchanged glances. "Does he mean the Middle East?" Harry heard someone whisper behind him. "It is many years since I have been in such a gathering of young minds," Gandalf continued, his eyes sweeping across the room. "But perhaps you first wish to know who I am and where it is that I come from. So, I will tell you my tale. Well, part of it, for the full tale is known by none, and I have forgotten much over the years." As he spoke, Gandalf began weaving a tale that was both spellbinding and fantastical. He spoke of ancient civilizations, of realms that existed beyond the confines of their known world, of mythical creatures that roamed vast and uncharted lands. His words painted vivid pictures in the minds of his listeners, transporting them to places they had never imagined. The tales of Middle-earth, with its heroes and villains, its battles and adventures, ignited the imaginations of everyone in the room. Harry and Ron exchanged looks of awe and wonder, but Hermione put up her hand. "Professor? Mrs. Cotton? Granger, actually, sir, there's nothing about any of this in any of the books I've read. Nothing about a Middle-earth, hobbits, the Shire, or Mordor. Nothing about destroying anyone's ring, sir." The classroom was silent for a moment as Hermione's words hung in the air. There was a collective sense of disbelief mixed with fascination at the professor's storytelling ability. Gandalf nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Indeed, Miss Granger, I recognize in you the autistic condition, but you are indeed correct. The tales and histories of Middle-earth are not to be found in your library or any known to the wizarding world. These are stories from a time and a place far removed from your own, from an age that predates the known history of magic as you understand it. Predating recorded history itself. In fact, there are some rings which are just not meant to be destroyed, Miss Cotton," he finished with a wink. The students exchanged slightly bewildered and unsettled looks. Gandalf's gaze swept across the room, his eyes reflecting the depth of his knowledge. "The world I come from, the world of Middle-earth, existed nearly 50,000 years ago. It was a time of great heroes and terrible villains, of epic battles and profound magic. The tales of that age have been lost to time, save for a few who remember and carry them forward." Harry, Ron, and Hermione listened intently. Harry's thoughts were on the dream he had had of the fiery mountain, the dark riders, and the figure of Gandalf himself. Could it be that his dream was a glimpse into this ancient world? Hermione's hand shot up again. "But Professor, how is it possible for you to be here, in our time? How did you travel from your world to ours?" Gandalf leaned against his desk, his eyes momentarily distant, as if recalling a long-forgotten memory. "I have remained enduring while all others perished." Ron, who had been silent, finally spoke up. "But why are you here, Professor? Why come to Hogwarts?" Gandalf's expression turned serious. "I am here because the fate of your world stands upon the edge of a knife. If uncorrected, it too will fall to darkness and ruin. Your world is ill-equipped to fight such foes. I am here to aid you in your fight against it, to share the wisdom of my age with yours. In my class, you shall learn a new magic, far more powerful and ancient than the feeble sorcery you now consider magic. Dumbledore's army is strong, but Gandalf's is mightier still." The bell rang, signaling the end of the class, but no one moved. They were all too absorbed in Gandalf's words. "Fly, you fools," said Gandalf with a smile. The students immediately rose from their seats and began leaving the classroom, almost as if compelled by a hidden power in the old wizard's voice. As the days turned into weeks, Gandalf's presence at Hogwarts became a transformative force. Not content with simply teaching the standard magic expected at the school, instead, he delved into the depths of ancient and forgotten arts. He unraveled the mysteries of elven enchantments, revealing the intricate and ethereal nature of their magic. He brought to light the secrets of dwarven runes, showcasing the earthy and powerful essence that lay within their craft. And with great care and caution, he explored the dark arts, not to encourage their usage, but to impart a deeper understanding of their allure and dangers. In his classes, Gandalf imparted his own extraordinary magic, surpassing the potency and power of the conventional spells of which they were familiar. He pushed the students to venture beyond the ordinary, urging them to challenge themselves and delve into the depths of their untapped potential. Gandalf emphasized the importance of resilience, teaching them to confront and triumph over obstacles. His teachings transcended the confines of the prescribed curriculum, interweaving profound lessons of morality, courage, and the unyielding strength of fellowship. With each passing day, Gandalf's wisdom and experience became increasingly apparent. He not only led his students on expeditions to the Forbidden Forest, where they had the rare opportunity to encounter magical creatures and witness the importance of coexistence and harmony, but he also regaled them with tales of long-ago adventures with the Ents and Gwaihir the Wind Lord. Gandalf's insatiable curiosity kindled their own as he presented them with ancient artifacts, challenging them to decipher forgotten runes and unlock the long-lost secrets of powerful enchantments. Outside the classroom, Gandalf became a steadfast pillar of support for his students, readily offering counsel and guidance to those in need. His door was always open, some students joking he had forgotten how to shut it, and many sought solace in his wise words, finding comfort and reassurance as he provided a puff of Old Toby while offering his invaluable guidance. Gandalf keenly perceived the sparks of greatness within everyone, nurturing an environment where they could flourish, grow, and harness their true potential. Under the guidance of Gandalf, Neville Longbottom grew remarkably in confidence, embracing challenges that once seemed insurmountable. Gandalf recognized resilience and determination within Longbottom, fostering for him an environment where he could flourish and hone his magical skills. Neville's progress was nothing short of extraordinary, and as he excelled in his studies and displayed unwavering courage in the face of adversity, the title of Neville the Brown was bestowed upon him in homage to his mastery over the earth arts. Ron Weasley, once known for his moments of self-doubt, flourished under Gandalf's guidance as well. Impressed by Ron's unwavering loyalty and heart, Gandalf playfully bestowed upon him the title of Ron Wise Gamgee. One afternoon, as class began filing out, Gandalf beckoned Harry to stay back. As he left the classroom, Goyle accidentally knocked over an enormous pile of books perched precariously on Gandalf's desk. "Fool of a took," bellowed the old wizard, taking them all by surprise. "I have not passed through fire and death to teach clumsy wizards to mind their footing." Goyle looked mortified. "Fly, you fool." Goyle bolted from the room in fear. "Cotton, Gamgee, do pick up those books for me." As Hermione bent down to help, she was filled with curiosity. She had never seen any of these books before, neither in Flourish and Blots or in the restricted section of the library. There was an enormous book titled There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Tale and the Ancient Runes of Doran's Folk. She picked this last one up and examined with interest, catching Gandalf's eye, which twinkled. "Young witch," he said, a smile playing on his lips, "the mysteries of ancient runes are indeed fascinating. But be warned, deciphering them can be as perplexing as navigating the minds of Moria. Now be off and don't forget your homework." "Not you," said Gandalf, nodding at Harry, who approached the teacher's desk as Gandalf took a seat, indicating for Harry to pull up a chair. "Potter," he said, his voice gruff, "it is time you and I talked." "Yes, Professor." Suddenly, there was an almighty crack in the room, the noise of which reverberated against the heavy stone walls, causing Gandalf to fall off his chair in fright. In the middle of the room stood Dobby. After barking a sting of expletives, Gandalf returned to his chair, looking at the stunted creature with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Harry, still seated, watched the exchange with a mix of shock and amusement. The abrupt arrival of Dobby, coupled with Gandalf's reaction and the profanity-filled tirade directed towards Dobby about house elves, took him by complete surprise. "Dobby is sorry if he frightened Professor Sir." "Dobby, it's all right," said Harry quickly, trying to ease the tension. "Professor Gandalf, this is Dobby, a free house elf and a friend. He's been of great help to us in the past." Gandalf looked at Dobby, his expression softening. "Ah, a free elf, you say? I see now that much has changed. How your kind has diminished. Upon a time, you stood among the wise and mighty, but alas, your blood has mingled with that of the goblins." Dobby nodded, still looking a bit shaken. Dobby came to deliver a message to Harry Potter, sir. Professor Dumbledore requires Harry Potter immediately. Thank you, Dobby, Harry said, standing up. Professor, I'm sorry, but I must go. Gandalf nodded. Very well, Potter. We will have our talk another time. But heed my warning before you go. Your enemy Voldemort is not what he seems. There is more at play than you perceive. Go. As Harry hurried out of the classroom, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Gandalf's knowledge of history and magic was unlike anything he had encountered before, but his thoughts were interrupted as he arrived at Dumbledore's office. The headmaster greeted him with his usual calm demeanor, but there appeared a sense of urgency in his eyes, gesturing him to his usual seat. Harry, I have called you because news has reached me, which requires our immediate attention. Voldemort and his forces are preparing an attack that could strike any moment upon this castle. We are running out of time. I am running out of time. We cannot wait any longer. I must tell you the tale of the Deathly Hallows before it is too late. The Deathly what? Asked Harry, taken aback by Dumbledore's unexpected grimness. The Deathly Hallows, Harry, are 3 highly powerful magical objects supposedly created by death itself. Legend has it that they consist of the Elder Wand, an unbeatable wand, the Resurrection Stone, which can summon the spirits of the dead, and the Invisibility Cloak, which renders the wearer invisible. Harry listened intently, his thoughts quickly flashing to the Invisibility Cloak he had inherited. The cloak! I have one, from my dad, he said slowly. Yes, Harry, your cloak is indeed the very one, Dumbledore confirmed with a nod. And I have the other 2, holding up his wand with his blackened hand, upon which was a cracked ring. Harry's eyes widened in astonishment as Dumbledore revealed the Elder Wand and the Resurrection Stone. The possibility that he was in the presence of all 3 Deathly Hallows was hard to believe. The Elder Wand, continued Dumbledore, holding up his wand. It is said to be the most powerful wand ever created, capable of feats of magic beyond any other. But it is also a wand that has brought much grief and bloodshed, for it has a bloody and tumultuous history. It has drawn those hungry for power, and has been the cause of many a wizard's downfall. Dumbledore then looked at the ring on his finger, his expression somber. And this, Harry, is the Resurrection Stone. It can bring back echoes of the dead. Bring back the dead? Stammered Harry in disbelief. No, Harry, not bring back the dead, not back to life as we know it. They are mere shadows of the dead, unable to interact with our world in any meaningful way. It's a dangerous object, Harry, for it tempts us with something we can never truly have. These Hallows, if united, would make one the master of death. What does it mean to be master of death? Asked Harry, but Dumbledore cut in. Voldemort will come for the wand. He must not get it. At that moment, there came a heavy knock at the door. Come in, said Dumbledore. In stepped Professor Gandalf with a presence that seemed to fill the room. His white robe shimmered faintly, and his eyes shone bright beneath his bushy eyebrows. Ah, Professor Gandalf, greeted Dumbledore, a small note of relief in his voice. To what do I owe this pleasure? Gandalf nodded, his gaze briefly moving to Harry before settling on Dumbledore. In one hand, he held his staff, and in the other he held his crystal ball. I sensed a disturbance, a convergence of powerful forces, he said in his deep, rumbling voice. We must take counsel before we are beset on all sides, my friend. Dumbledore nodded. Please excuse us, Harry. I will send Dobby when I'm done, said Dumbledore apologetically, dismissing Harry. Harry stood without hesitation. He felt tempted to ask permission to stay and listen, but he knew better. The Council of Dumbledore and Gandalf had begun. Harry Potter and the White Wizard. Chapter 3, Dumbledore and Gandalf, a Council of the Wise. They sat in the secluded office of the headmaster of Hogwarts, 2 of the greatest wizards of all time. Dumbledore of the wizarding world and Gandalf, a sage from an age long past. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the room, creating an ambiance that was both comforting and eerie, a fitting backdrop for the weighty discussion that was about to unfold. Gandalf, his imposing figure cloaked in white, broke the silence that had settled between them. "Albus, enlighten me of your plight against the Dark Lord. How fares the battle?" Dumbledore, his face appearing more lined in the dim light, leaned back in his chair. "I will not hide our situation from you, Gandalf. It is indeed dire. Voldemort's power grows inexplicably, and our efforts to stem his tide seem more akin to delaying the inevitable." Gandalf acknowledged with a wave of his hand. "The threads of destiny are entwined in a complex web, Albus. I have seen your struggles with the Deathly Hallows and the Horcruxes, but there is more at play than even you have perceived, and I am sorry to say, it is a battle you cannot win. Not alone." Dumbledore's eyes grew wide. "How do you know of these things?" He raised the crystal ball in his hand and placed it upon Dumbledore's desk. "Through the Palantir, I have seen much. It is one of the original seeing stones of which your crystal balls are but pale imitation. I have glimpsed your adversary's strategies. His position is formidable. You have seen the Dark Lord and his plans? I have, and I have seen how things were meant to be before time was meddled with." "What do you mean time was meddled with? Meddled by whom?" Gandalf leaned forward, his voice now a soft, confessional whisper. "I must reveal to you, my friend, the extent of my actions in my world. You see, I was in a desperate situation, striving to change the course of the War of the Ring which teetered on the brink of disaster," Gandalf recounted, his voice echoing the depth of his sorrow. "The enemy almost claimed the One Ring, and in a moment of desperation, I seized it and, in doing so, vanquished our foe. But it came at a great cost. The loss of many I held dear." Dumbledore's gaze was sympathetic. "As a fellow bearer of burdens, I understand. Such is the price of war, Gandalf. Oftentimes, our victories are drowned with sorrow." Gandalf sighed. "In my grief, I sought to undo the past, having wallowed in my grief for countless millennia. I turned the time turner back 50,000 years, hoping to bring back those I had lost and alter our dreadful outcome. Alas, my actions had unforeseen and dire consequences." Dumbledore, his expression unreadable, nodded cautiously. "The manipulation of time is a dangerous endeavor, fraught with unforeseen outcomes." Gandalf continued, his voice heavy with regret. "In my efforts, I could not alter the fate of my friends. But worse, much worse, I unleashed an ancient evil into your world that I did not intend. A foe that should have remained buried in the bowels of history." Dumbledore's eyes widened slightly, a sense of realization dawning on him. "You speak of a force other than Voldemort?" "Yes," Gandalf confirmed gravely. "In tearing apart the fabric of time, I inadvertently allowed the spirit of Saruman, corrupt and filled with malice, to endure. This spirit has now merged with Voldemort, making him far more dangerous than I could have imagined." Dumbledore leaned forward, frowning, his hands clasped. "Merged with Voldemort. When a soul is ripped from a body, it leaves behind a void, a gap which can be filled by spirits equally broken and uncontented with the finality of death. Souls bent upon retribution and destruction of the pure and innocent. When Voldemort created his Horcrux, his body was no longer whole, allowing it to be occupied by a foe beyond this time. It is why Voldemort is far more formidable than he should be. So, if I understand correctly, we face not only Voldemort but an ancient foe from your time?" asked Dumbledore, choosing not to address the fact that Gandalf knew of the Horcruxes at this moment. "Indeed, our enemy is not the Voldemort that should have been. He is something far more formidable, a fusion of dark powers from two worlds. His spirit is now bolstered by the cunning and malice of Saruman. Once amongst the wisest of my order, he fell to darkness long ago. corrupted by greed and power. This school is built upon the ruins of his ancient dwelling on the borders of Fangorn Forest. Dumbledore considered Gandalf's words quietly for a moment before responding. Then how do we defeat him if by destroying the fragments of his soul, his Horcrux, we allow more of this entity, Saruman, to invade his being and make him stronger? He asked. There is only one way. We must release the fragments of soul that are trapped in these Horcruxes and destabilize his body. Both souls will vie for dominance of one body, perhaps destroying one another, or perhaps it will only make him stronger. A cup can only hold so much tea if you take my meaning. I confess, I do not know which the likelier outcome, but it is the only way to untether them from immortality. If we simply destroy the Horcrux, then Saruman will have the chance he needs to once more raise his armies and establish his kingdom. A long silence descended in the office as Dumbledore considered Gandalf's news. Suddenly, his expression changed to one stricken with grief. Harry Potter, the boy marked by Voldemort, stands at the center of this conflict. Gandalf. He carries a fragment of Voldemort's soul within him, a piece that must be destroyed or removed to defeat Voldemort. I had planned meticulously for years, ensuring the boy survived, but if your counsel is correct, I cannot see a way for Harry to survive the release of Voldemort's soul fragment. A tear ran down the long nose of Dumbledore. Gandalf smiled. Do not fear, for I bring at least a glimmer of hope, Albus, for I possess the means to extract this fragment from the boy. How? Asked Dumbledore, his face still full of concern. As one might draw poison from a wound, I will draw out this tainted soul, cleansing the boy. You would suck out his soul? In a manner, yes. But at what cost? The loss of his life? Gandalf's eyes twinkled with a hint of his inherent wisdom. No, Albus. The boy will live. The removal of this fragment will not harm him. It's a delicate process, but within my power. Dumbledore's eyes lit up with a renewed sense of hope. Then we must act swiftly. At that moment, Dumbledore called out, Dobby! With a sharp crack, the Free House elf appeared beside them, causing Gandalf, still on edge from their tense discussion, to react instinctively. With a swift motion of his staff, Gandalf inadvertently struck out, sending Dobby flying hard across the room. For a moment, confusion reigned. Dumbledore quickly rose from his chair, his expression a mix of concern and surprise. Gandalf, it's Dobby. He means no harm. Gandalf, realizing his mistake, lowered his staff, a look of mild embarrassment passing over his face. My apologies, Dobby. My reactions were honed in a different time, a different war. Dobby, now nursing a large bump on his head, looked up with wide, pained eyes. Dumbledore, with a wave of his wand, gently eased the swelling and soothed the bruise. There, Dobby, that should feel better. Dobby nodded, still a bit dazed but visibly better. Dobby is sorry for startling the great wizard, sir. Dumbledore gave a small, reassuring smile. It's quite all right, Dobby. Please, could you fetch Harry for us immediately? Yes, Professor Dumbledore, sir, Dobby said, still a bit unsteady but obediently disappearing with another crack to fetch Harry. Once Dobby had left, Dumbledore turned to Gandalf, a wry smile on his face. Our world's surprises can be somewhat jarring at times, even for a wizard of your stature. Gandalf, looking a tad sheepish, nodded. Indeed, Albus. The room settled back into a calm silence, awaiting Harry's arrival. When the door finally opened and Harry stepped in, he could sense a tension in the air. Harry, we have much to discuss, Dumbledore began. But first, Gandalf has something he must do. Gandalf approached Harry, his staff in hand. With a few ancient words, a soft glow emanated from the staff's tip, enveloping Harry in a gentle light. The room was silent, the only sound being the soft hum of magic at work. After a moment, Gandalf's staff drew forth a wisp of dark smoke from Harry's forehead. It swirled in the air before being sealed into a glass vial that Gandalf had produced from his robes. The deed was done. The fragment of Voldemort's soul was now contained. Harry blinked, feeling an immediate sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from him. Dumbledore and Gandalf shared a look of quiet triumph. "Thank you," Dumbledore whispered, his eyes full of gratitude towards Gandalf, before turning and placing a hand on Harry's shoulder. "Harry, you were an unintended Horcrux. Voldemort unknowingly transferred a part of himself to you the night he tried to kill you. But now, thanks to Gandalf, you are free of that part of him." I don't know what to say," responded Harry, shock and relief washing over him as he stood trying to understand this revelation. "So, he had been a Horcrux this whole time?" "There is nothing to say, Harry," Gandalf interjected kindly. "You have been brave beyond measure." Dumbledore gestured towards the door. "You should rest now, Harry. I must continue my talk with Professor Gandalf immediately." As Harry left the office, feeling lighter than he'd ever felt before, Dumbledore and Gandalf resumed their seats. "Thank you, Gandalf. A great burden has been lifted from me. My concern for Harry threatened at times my conviction for this war." Gandalf nodded, acknowledging Dumbledore's gratitude. "Now, Albus, we must prepare," Gandalf said, turning serious once again. "The road ahead will be challenging, and you cannot fight this battle alone, Albus. The enemy we face requires our combined strength." Dumbledore showcased his blackened, withered hand. "Unfortunately, my strength has waned, Gandalf. Age and injuries have taken their toll, and I am no longer the wizard I once was." Gandalf studied Dumbledore's withered hand gravely. "This will not do, Albus. We need you at your best if we're going to stand a chance in this war." Dumbledore sighed. "Alas, I have reached my limit. There is not much we can do other than to continue our resistance. Perhaps there is a way." Gandalf reached into the folds of his robe and produced a ring, its gem glinting in the candlelight. "Then accept this gift, Velia, the Ring of Air. It was born by Gil-galad and Elrond, and now it is yours. It is an elven ring of healing." As Dumbledore slipped the ring onto the index finger of his blackened hand, a miraculous transformation occurred. With immediate effect, the withered hand restored. His body appeared to regain the vigor of youth, though his eyes retained the wisdom of his years. "Together, Albus, we must confront this darkness. The fate of our worlds hangs in the balance." Dumbledore's eyes, wide with wonder behind his glasses, felt an invigorating surge of strength. "What magic is this?" he asked in awe, taking off his glasses as his vision returned to that of his youth. "This is Velia, one of the 3 rings of the elves. I entrust it to you, knowing you will use its power for the greater good. It will amplify your wisdom, heighten your perception, and more importantly, heal your body." Dumbledore felt a sensation akin to a refreshing ocean breeze, invigorating his spirit and clearing his mind. It bestowed upon him a clarity and focus beyond anything he had previously known. "This is extraordinary, Gandalf. I am profoundly grateful for such a formidable gift, my dear friend," expressed Dumbledore, his voice full of gratitude. He gazed at his reflection in the mirror beside his desk, marveling at the transformation. The image staring back was that of his younger self, a man with red hair, unburdened by age, his vision clear without the need for spectacles. Rising from his chair, Dumbledore extended his now restored hand, which Gandalf warmly grasped. "Together, we shall defeat this darkness, my friend." Harry Potter and the Elder Wizard. Chapter 4: The New Care of Magical Creatures Teacher. The castle buzzed with intrigue, whispers, and rumors the next morning. The news of Dumbledore's astonishing transformation had somehow spread like wildfire, and every eye was fixed on the staff table, awaiting his arrival. "I heard he looks like a teenager again," said Seamus, making everyone laugh. "Maybe he'll ask you out for Valentine's Day, Hermione," smirked Ron. At least he's not ginger, spat Hermione in a savage clapback, stunning Ron. As if on cue, the door swung open with a grandeur that silenced the hall. Dumbledore, with his newfound youth and vigor, strode confidently to the podium. His appearance was startling. Gone were the wrinkles and signs of age. These were replaced by the smooth skin and robust health of his younger years. Murmurs erupted, but a raised hand from their headmaster brought instant quiet. "Good morning, my young wizards and witches," he began, his voice strong and now less old-sounding than they were accustomed. "Some of you may have noticed a small change in my appearance. Last night, an old friend provided me with the gift of rejuvenation. I stand before you now, renewed, reinvigorated, and ready to defend our beloved school and the wider wizarding world against the darkness that encroaches." The hall erupted into whispers once more, the students exchanging looks of awe and disbelief. Change, however, is not limited to my person. Hogwarts itself must adapt for the times we face. In the coming days, you will notice several changes around the school. These are necessary to ensure our safety and to prepare us for the challenges ahead. With a final reassuring smile, Dumbledore returned to his seat, leaving the hall reignited with excitement and speculation. Later that morning, Harry, Ron, and Hermione made their way down to the grounds for their Care of Magical Creatures lesson, discussing the potential changes Dumbledore was talking about. As they approached the usual spot, they stopped short, unexpectedly seeing Professor Gandalf, tall and commanding, standing beside another figure they didn't recognize. An equally ancient-looking wizard with a slightly eccentric appearance, cloaked in earthy tones, and surrounded by a few curious creatures. "Gather round, everyone, and meet your new Care of Magical Creatures teacher," Gandalf greeted them warmly. "Dumbledore has asked me to introduce your new teacher. This is Professor Radagast the Brown, a fellow wizard from my world, skilled in the ways of wild beasts and changes of hue." "What happened to Professor Hagrid?" asked Harry, interrupting Gandalf. "Silence," barked Gandalf, leering at Harry for a moment before gesturing for their new teacher to take over. Radagast, with a kind and somewhat absent-minded smile, nodded at them. "Pleased to meet you, children. I look forward to sharing the wonders of magical creatures with you." The students exchanged bewildered looks. Another wizard from Gandalf's world? What other wonders and oddities were in store for them? And why was Hagrid being replaced? As the class proceeded, Radagast proved to be a knowledgeable and engaging teacher, introducing the students to creatures they had never before seen or heard of. His methods were unconventional but effective. He sat them down at the edge of the forest and told them of the wargs and goblins, of fell beasts, great eagles, and of Smog, the chiefest and greatest of calamities. After class, the trio spotted Hagrid approaching them, looking somewhat forlorn. "It's all temporary, just till the war's over," he explained in his gruff voice. "Dumbledore reckons with Voldemort gathering forces. We need all the help we can get. I'm back to being the groundskeeper for now, keeping an eye on the borders." Harry, sensing Hagrid's mixed feelings, clapped a hand on his massive shoulder. "We'll still need you, Hagrid." Hagrid offered a small smile, patting Harry's back with a hand so large and heavy, Harry coughed up some blood. His eyes widened in horror as he looked at the crimson in his hand. He hoped the internal bleeding wasn't too bad as Hagrid, who seemed oblivious to what he had done, went on. "Thanks, Harry. Just you wait. Hogwarts will be stronger than ever with all this help and Dumbledore being strong again, just you wait." As they walked back to the castle, the trio discussed the changes. Hogwarts was evolving, preparing for a battle that loomed ever closer. With Gandalf and Radagast's arrival, they felt a mix of hope and uncertainty. The war was coming, but so were allies from beyond their world, bringing with them new strengths and weapons perhaps. Above them, the castle stood tall and proud, a beacon of light against the coming darkness. With Dumbledore's renewed vigor and the wisdom of wizards from another world, Hogwarts was more than a school. It was a fortress, a symbol of resistance, and a home to those who would stand against the night. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but together they would face it. With a small pop, Dobby appeared beside Harry. "Hi, Dobby," the trio greeted. "Master Harry, Professor Dumbledore needs you and Professor Gandalf immediately," he squeaked, his hands raised defensively as if expecting another accidental strike. Harry, concerned by Dobby's fearful demeanor, nodded and followed the house elf, weaving through the corridors filled with the soft echoes of hundreds of years of magical learning. As they approached Dumbledore's office, the low, angry rumble of voices from within halted them. "An unbreakable vow," shouted the unmistakable voice of Snape, but Harry noted it carried both fear and fury. "I promise to protect Draco until he succeeds in the task the Dark Lord has given him. And if he fails, I must do it myself. I cannot break this vow, Albus." Dobby cowered, but Harry was full of curiosity, motioning for him to be quiet as they listened. Gandalf's voice then thundered from inside the office in response, his tone as commanding as a storm. "Be silent. Keep your forked tongue behind your teeth. I have not passed through fire and death to bandy crooked words with a witless worm." There was a stunned silence. Then Dumbledore's calmer voice cut through the tension. "Severus, I understand the gravity of your situation. We must find a way to delay Draco's plans. We need time to devise a means to circumvent the consequences of breaking this unbreakable vow." Snape responded with a frustrated hiss. "Time. How much time do we have, Albus? Draco is determined, and the Dark Lord grows impatient. If I fail to fulfill my vow, it will kill me." Dumbledore's tone was grave yet calming. "I am aware of the risks, Severus. But we have no other choice at the present other than to accept the risk. If you wish to remove this risk and save your own life now, thereby guaranteeing our defeat of this war, then go ahead. Take my life. I will not stop you." There was a lengthy pause in the office before Dumbledore spoke again. Evidently, Snape had chosen not to save his own life. "Fate now begins to favor us. We now have new allies and wisdom on our side. Gandalf here has faced darkness that would wither the souls of most. We will find a solution, I promise you." Harry's mind raced. The situation was more dire than he had imagined. Snape, bound by an unbreakable vow to protect Draco and possibly kill Dumbledore? What on earth was going on? This was a tangled web of loyalties and complexities that seemed impossible for Harry's simple mind to unravel. He was about to knock on the door when it suddenly swung open, revealing Dumbledore, his eyes twinkling. Harry still hadn't gotten used to his new youthful appearance. His once ancient headmaster now looked like a slim man in his mid-30s. "Harry, please come in," he said. Harry stepped into the office and took his usual seat as indicated by Dumbledore. The room, usually filled with the sounds of various magical devices, was unusually quiet. "Thank you for coming so promptly," he said, then turned his gaze to Snape. "Severus, we will continue this discussion later." Snape's face was a storm of rage, but he nodded stiffly and turned to leave. As he passed Gandalf, the wizard's deep voice rumbled once more. "Remember, Severus, you are of the line of Grima Wormtongue. Choose your words and your path carefully." Snape paused, his back rigid, then without a word, swept out of the room. As the door closed, Dumbledore turned and focused on Harry. "Professor, what's an unbreakable vow?" asked Harry before he could stop himself. "I know you have many questions, and in time, I hope to answer them all. But for now, I must ask you to trust me when I say some matters are not your concern at this moment." Harry nodded slightly, embarrassed at his impulsiveness, at letting them know he'd been listening at the door, but reading the finality in Dumbledore's tone, he decided not to press the matter. Dumbledore's face softened slightly. "Thank you, Harry. Now, on to more pressing matters. We have located a Horcrux, one of the pieces of Voldemort's soul. Its acquiring is vital to weakening him and ultimately defeating him." Harry's heart raced. "What do you need me to do, sir?" "I would like you to accompany Professor Gandalf and I to retrieve it," responded Dumbledore. "Your connection to Voldemort might be crucial in locating it." "Yes, sir. When do we leave?" "Tonight," replied Dumbledore. "The Order, along with the teachers, will be on guard while we are away. You must be discreet and quick. Go back to your dormitory, collect your cloak, and return here immediately." "Okay, sir. I'll be back as quickly as I can." And without hesitation, Harry rose and hurried out of the office. Fortunately, on his way to Gryffindor Tower, he found Ron and Hermione and quickly pulled them aside. "Listen," he said in a hushed tone. "Dumbledore and Gandalf will be away from the castle tonight. They're going after a Horcrux, and I'm going with them. Stay on guard and keep this quiet. I have a feeling there might be trouble tonight." "Wow," said Ron, his face a mixture of fear and admiration, while Hermione looked worried. "Be careful, Harry," she said tensely. "I will," he promised, before dashing off to his dormitory. Cloak in hand, Harry returned to Dumbledore's office, panting. "Are you ready, Harry?" Dumbledore asked. Harry nodded, his hand gripping the cloak tightly. "Yes, sir." "Very well," said Dumbledore, standing up. He approached a cabinet and withdrew a small, intricately carved box. "We will be traveling by portkey. It is a safer and more discreet way to travel under the current circumstances." As Harry prepared to step forward, Gandalf's gaze fell upon the cloak in his hand. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand. Harry handed the cloak over, and Gandalf examined it closely, his eyes narrowing with vague familiarity. "Ah, this is no ordinary garment," he remarked, as though recognizing an old possession. "An enchanted elven cloak of Lothlorien, if I'm not mistaken. A rare and valuable piece of craftsmanship." "You know about my cloak?" asked Harry in surprise. "I do," Gandalf smiled, a glint of appreciation in his eyes. "It will serve you well on our journey." He handed the cloak back to Harry, but did not elaborate any further. Gandalf stepped forward, his eyes reflecting the flickering light of the room. "The road ahead will be perilous, Harry. Keep your wits about you." "I will, sir." Dumbledore offered an encouraging smile. "I have no doubt of that, Harry. Now, let's go." The three of them touched the portkey. There was a sudden jerk behind their navels, and the world whirled away. Their quest for the Horcrux had begun. Harry Potter and the Elder Wizard. Chapter 5: The Cave. The world was a storm of fury and noise as Harry, Dumbledore, and Gandalf approached the cliffside where the cave lay hidden. The cave Harry had seen, in the memory Dumbledore had shared with him. The sea churned below them, its waves crashing against the cliffs with a ferocity that sent sprays of cold salt water hurtling into the air. The sky, a dark canvas of ominous clouds, threatened with the occasional flash of distant lightning. The entrance to the cave was barely discernible against the dark, rocky backdrop. Dumbledore led the trio to the edge, his wand glowing softly in his hand. With intricate gestures and a whispered incantation, the entrance widened, the sea momentarily calming at the mouth of the cave. "We'll have to swim across." Dumbledore's voice cut through the roar of the wind, barely audible over the tumult of the sea. Harry looked at the churning waters with a deep sense of dread. "Could you not conjure a boat, Professor?" "It's only water, Harry. Don't be afraid of getting a little wet," replied Dumbledore with a clear look of disappointment in his eyes. Gandalf, beside him, muttered under his breath about the cold and the wet, his stoic demeanor giving way to obvious discomfort. With a deep breath, they plunged into the icy waters. The cold was an immediate assault, the waves tossing them around with the force of the storm. Harry struggled against the water, fighting for every stroke, following the dim lights of Dumbledore and Gandalf, who swam with powerful strokes toward the cave. The swim felt endless, but he pressed on, drawing on every reserve of strength he had in the wake of being shamed by his headmaster. When they finally reached the relative calm at the opening of the cave, they clambered onto a rocky outcrop, taking a moment to catch their breath. Their chests heaved and their hearts pounded from the exertion and fear. As they entered the cave, the air grew colder, the oppressive weight of the place pressing down upon them. They moved cautiously, aware of the magical protections that might lurk unseen around them. The path led deeper into the earth, the walls of the cave closing in around them until they reached a large antechamber. In the center, a small lake lay still and silent, an island barely visible in the middle. Dumbledore paused, his eyes scanning the smooth rock wall that blocked their way forward. "This is not a natural formation," he murmured. "There's magic here, dark and old." He raised his hand, revealing a small silver dagger, and prepared to cut his palm, in apparent sacrifice necessary to open the way. But Gandalf intervened, his hand closing firmly over Dumbledore's. "Wait, Albus. There is more than one way to overcome such barriers." He stepped forward, his staff raised. The ancient wizard spoke a word of command, a word that seemed to echo from the very depths of the earth. The rock wall shivered and then, with a sound like a sigh, it parted, revealing the dark waters of the lake beyond. Entering, they turned the corner and a massive cavern opened up before them, revealing a vast underground lake. In the center, an island loomed, a solitary silhouette against the dimly lit waters. On it, they could just make out the outline, a small thin altar of sorts. Dumbledore, his eyes sharp and searching, investigated the area, his wand illuminating the dark recesses along the shore. It was then that he discovered something hidden from ordinary sight, a small chain, partially submerged and almost indistinguishable from the rocks around it. Dumbledore tapped the chain with his wand. There was a small clinking sound, and then, to Harry's surprise, a small boat began to emerge from the shadows, pulled towards them by the enchanted chain. It bobbed gently on the surface of the lake, seemingly waiting for its passengers. "This will carry us to the island," Dumbledore declared. "Are you sure you don't want to swim, Professor?" asked Harry in mock innocence, but failing to entirely disguise the sarcasm in his voice. Dumbledore scowled but did not respond. They climbed into the small vessel which held steady under their weight. Dumbledore released the chain, and it began to move of its own accord, gliding silently over the dark waters toward the island. Harry sat tense and alert, his eyes fixed on their destination, the sense of foreboding growing with every passing moment. He could feel a malignant presence calling out to them from the darkness. The journey across the lake was eerie and silent. The only sound, the gentle lapping of water against the side of the boat. When they finally reached the shore, the sense of dread was almost overwhelming upon Harry. Dumbledore led them to the center, where the basin sat on an ancient pedestal. It was filled with a potion that shimmered with an unnatural light, beneath which they saw the locket sitting. "There's no way of getting to the locket without first drinking the potion," Dumbledore declared after a couple minutes, the investigating bowl. Harry watched, a horrible knot forming in his stomach, as the headmaster conjured a cup and began to drink the cursed liquid. Each gulp seemed to take a toll on him, his body shaking, his breaths becoming labored. Panicking, Harry looked to Gandalf for help to ease his headmaster's suffering. "Fear not. The ring will protect him from the worst of it," comforted Gandalf, in response to Harry's silent pleas for help. As Dumbledore continued to consume the potion, his features contorted in pain, a grimace etched deep into his face. Harry's heart raced with fear, his hands clenching into fists at his side, feeling every shudder and wince as if they were his own. Gandalf stood beside them, a stoic guardian, his eyes ever watchful for the danger they all sensed was coming. Then, as Dumbledore's sips became more labored and the basin finally emptied, a weak plea escaped his lips. "Water!" he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Harry, frantic with worry, glanced around the cavern. The only source of water was the lake surrounding them, dark and still. Without a second thought, Harry rushed to the water's edge, his hands cupping together to bring some of the lake water to Dumbledore. But as his fingers touched the surface, the calm water stirred and shapes began to emerge from the depths. Gaunt, ghostly figures, Their eyes void of life rose up from the lake. The Inferi, guardians of the Horcrux, had been disturbed by his attempt to take the water. The Inferi came, rising from the dark waters like nightmares brought to life. Gandalf sprang into action, Glamdring shining brightly in that dark cave. He fought with a fury that was both terrifying and age-defying, cutting through the Inferi with each swing of his sword. Harry joined the fight, casting spells and pushing back the undead with every ounce of strength he had. When it was over and the Inferi were vanquished, they rushed to Dumbledore's side. He was weak, barely conscious, but his rejuvenated body held up better than it would have had he still been an old man. Gandalf pulled a small flask from his robe and put it to Dumbledore's mouth. "Drink," he commanded. "This is Miruvor, the cordial of Imladris." And as he drank, the color slowly returned to his pale face. Dumbledore, though still visibly weak, seemed to regain most of his strength. The effects of the elven cordial Gandalf had administered, combined with the protection offered by the ring Velia and his recently reinvigorated youth, worked to heal him remarkably well. Harry shuddered at the thought of what might have happened if they had not had all these things, and Dumbledore was still an old man. After a few minutes, his breathing steadied and color returned to his cheeks. Once the immediate danger had passed and the last of the Inferi retreated into the Black Waters, Gandalf turned his attention to their situation. "Albus, we cannot linger here. Let's return to the school," he counseled. "Let's go," said Dumbledore, nodding. Suddenly, with a familiar sensation of being pulled through a tight tube, they apparated away from the island, leaving the dark cave and its horrors behind. They arrived amidst the familiar sights and sounds of Hogsmeade, but their attention was immediately drawn to the dark mark visible in the distance, casting an ominous glow over the tallest tower of Hogwarts. "What?" gasped Harry, his heart sinking. The symbol of fear and death hovered above his school, signaling that danger and maybe even death had already arrived. Dumbledore now stood strong, his vitality visibly restored, looking toward his school with a cold fury. Thinking quickly, Harry ran and secured them broomsticks from Madame Rosmerta, who was aware of the urgency and did not dare question the trio. Mounting the broomsticks, they took to the air. The wind whipped around them as they soared towards the castle. The journey was a blur, the landscape below passing in a rush of shadows and light. Harry's mind raced with fear and dark thoughts. What had transpired under the dark mark? Were they too late? As they landed on the tower, the air crackled with tension, and the dark mark loomed ominously above, casting a pale green glow on surroundings. Without warning, a disarming spell struck Dumbledore. His wand flew from his hand, clattering to the ground, where Draco Malfoy quickly scooped it up. Dumbledore, with a swift motion, had managed to cast a freezing charm on Harry before being disarmed, keeping him hidden and immobile under the cloak, ensuring he wouldn't intervene. Had Dumbledore's newfound youth come at the cost of his wits? Harry thought angrily. Why had he chosen to immobilize his own ally and not the enemy before him, costing him his wand and opportunity to defend himself? His heart pounded as he now watched Draco Malfoy approach Dumbledore, his wand shaking as he pointed it at their headmaster. Their situation was fraught with nervous tension as Draco fought a particularly challenging moral quandary. The Death Eaters approached, their dark forms emerging from the shadows, and began pressing Draco to act, with venomous whispers spurring him on. As Draco struggled, torn between his orders and his conscience, Snape appeared, his face a mask of unreadable intent as he approached Dumbledore. The moment was charged, a standoff that felt like the calm before a storm. Then, without warning, a deep bellow echoed through the tower. Gandalf, who had been momentarily out of sight and forgotten about, emerged with a fury unmatched. His staff raised high, he unleashed a powerful blast of magic that went off like a bomb. The Death Eaters, caught off guard, were flung like ragdolls, some careening off the tower into the abyss below. Draco, his resolve faltering at the sight of such raw power, was caught in the shockwave and thrown over the edge, his scream piercing the night. But at that moment, Snape, in a flash of dark magic, transformed into an enormous ugly bat, swooping down after him. In the corner of his eye, Harry was able to see the large bat-like form catching the screaming Draco before he could hit the ground and carrying him away into the night. The remaining Death Eaters, those who had managed to cling to the tower, scrambled to escape, their plans in disarray. Gandalf now stood in their midst unveiled, a blinding white figure. He unleashed Glamdring and with a smooth sweep took off the head of Fenrir Greyback, instantly unaliving him and causing the other Death Eaters to scatter. Only one masked Death Eater remained, raising his wand to strike at the unarmed Dumbledore, but before the spell could leave his lips, Gandalf was upon him. With another swift, clean stroke, Glamdring cut through the air and severed the Death Eater's arm. It fell to the ground with a sickening thud, causing the masked Death Eater to scream loud enough to wake the entire castle. The battle was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Several Death Eaters lay dead at his feet, only a handful managing to escape his fury. The Death Eaters, those who had survived, retreated into the night, their numbers diminished. The tower, once a place of quiet study of the heavens, had become a battleground, the scene of a fierce clash between light and dark. In the aftermath, Dumbledore, Harry, and Gandalf regrouped, their breathing heavy from the confrontation. Harry, no longer frozen, felt an enormous wave of relief. None of the Order or his friends had been hurt in the attack, and they had faced Death Eaters, retrieved a Horcrux, and survived. The war against Voldemort was far from over, but today was a great victory. Back in Dumbledore's office, the first light of dawn had broken through the windows, casting a soft glow on the trio. They sat reflecting on the night's events. "We have achieved a great victory today, Albus, but I fear the final confrontation will not be so easy." "No, Gandalf, our situation is far more dire than you realize," responded Dumbledore, looking uncharacteristically distraught. "I lost the Elder Wand to Draco. Should Voldemort claim it, I fear he will become unbeatable, with the spirit of Sauron aiding him even for our combined strength." Gandalf was silent for a moment. Then, with a sudden brightness, he spoke, "Not while I walk Middle-earth. I've come to you at this crucial turn of the tide, not to witness your defeat, but to aid you against the forces of evil. This Elder Wand, these deathly hallows, are more familiar to me than you might imagine." Dumbledore's eyes widened, recalling prior mention of them by Gandalf. "You know of the Hallows?" "I do, for I was there at their inception. The tale of the Peverell brothers and the gifts I bestowed upon them has been twisted through the ages. But know this, the power they wielded, the power you fear now, is but a shadow of what truly was," revealed Gandalf. You were Death?" stammered Harry incredulously, his mind reeling. Gandalf nodded solemnly. "I have been many things, Harry, and to many I was indeed been Death. But the time of the Peverells was different. They showed courage and wisdom, and in return, I granted them rewards to aid their quest for a better world." He raised his staff. The ancient woods seemed to pulse with a deep inner light. "The Elder Wand was made from this very staff, which I hold." Gandalf held it aloft for them to see. "It possesses but a small portion of the staff's power. As for my strength, you have but seen glimpse of it. You created the Deathly Hallows," continued Dumbledore, scrutinizing both Gandalf and his staff, as if seeing them properly for the first time. "Yes, even your cloak, Harry. It is a cloak of Lothlorien, made by the Lady of the Woods, enchanted and imbued with the power of the One Ring." "And the Resurrection Stone?" asked Dumbledore. "Alas, I created the ring in my longing to speak to those I lost in the Fellowship. I have had long years to study ring lore and was eventually able to craft it. I spoke to my friends, who forgave me for failing them. When I met the second brother, I saw in his eyes the loss I once felt, so I gave him the Resurrection Stone. Unfortunately, he turned out to be an imbecile and promptly took his own life." Then perhaps all is not lost, responded Dumbledore, a new spark of hope flickering in his eyes. No, indeed it is not. Harry Potter and the Elder Wizard. Chapter 6. The Dream-Enhancing Potion. The dawn's early light crept through the windows of Hogwarts. The night's battle atop the astronomy tower had left its mark upon the inhabitants of the castle, reminding all of the inescapable war that loomed over them. In the aftermath, Dumbledore found himself in the quiet solitude of his office, the weight of their situation pressing heavily upon his shoulders. Yet, amidst the shadows of doubt, a flicker of hope had been rekindled. Sitting across from Professor McGonagall, Dumbledore shared his reflections on the battle and the revelations it had brought. "Minerva," he began, his voice filled with reverence and humility. "I have witnessed many wonders in my lifetime, but the power and savagery that Professor Gandalf brought down upon our foes is beyond anything I have ever seen." McGonagall, ever the stoic presence, listened with pursed lips. "Do you believe we stand a chance then, Albus?" Dumbledore thought for a moment, then nodded. This night they had accomplished the impossible. But had Gandalf not been with them, it would have ended very differently. Gandalf had saved his life once again. The tension he had held in his heart since the attack on Harry's parents and the burden that had fallen on his shoulders had eased somewhat. He now had the support of an equal for the first time since. He couldn't remember when. "I do, Minerva. Professor Gandalf has brought not only his formidable power, but also a renewed hope. Voldemort will be aware of him by now, I'm sure. He will fear that another equal has arisen, unaware that he is in fact wholly unmatched. Do you think he'll try to attack the school again? Professor Gandalf believes Voldemort will attempt to raise an army, one far greater than any we have seen. We must be prepared, for it would seem our enemy will stop at nothing to achieve his ends." "And what of Severus Snape?" asked McGonagall, disdain evident upon her face. "He has fled with Draco," replied Dumbledore sharply, a warning evident in his voice not to press further on the matter. Revealing Snape's true allegiance at this juncture could jeopardize his critical role as a spy. What would eventually become of him, he did not rightly know. Perhaps the unbreakable vow did not have a time limit upon it, and Snape would have years to fulfill this vow, or Gandalf would manage to break this curse, or perhaps he would die and the world would remain unaware of his true bravery. The departure of Severus and young Draco is a truly unfortunate outcome. Their paths have taken a turn I confess I had not foreseen, and it is a loss that weighs heavily on my heart. McGonagall's gaze was sympathetic, understanding the complexity of the challenge Dumbledore faced. "He was always a snotty little bastard, that Draco," she added, unable to help herself. "Be that as it may, he was still a student at this school and under our care." The conversation then shifted as Dumbledore outlined the challenge that lay ahead of them. "We must turn our attention to the defense of Hogwarts, for an attack is undoubtedly coming, Minerva. There is no safer place than Hogwarts, and it must remain so." In the quiet aftermath of their meeting, as Professor McGonagall's footsteps echoed softly away, Dumbledore once again returned to deep contemplation, his thoughts more potent and sharper due to the elven ring upon his finger. Such was its effect. He no longer required the use of his pensive. Positioned by the window, his gaze lingered over the vast expanse of Hogwarts grounds. The landscape had completely changed in the short time since Gandalf had joined them. He had thought the destruction of the Horcruxes was the key to dismantling Voldemort's immortality and rendering him vulnerable. The progress they had made was significant. Yet, according to Gandalf, to destroy the Horcrux would only serve to strengthen Saruman's grasp over Voldemort and possession of his body. Instead, he had counseled that they must collect the Horcrux and release the fragments of soul within them at the right moment, destabilizing Voldemort's body and allowing them a crucial opening to destroy it. It was true. Voldemort now likely had the Elder Wand and may have unlocked its full power if taken from Draco by force. But according to Gandalf, The wand bore only a fraction of the power held by his staff, from which it had originally come. How would he, Albus Dumbledore, fare against a Voldemort now armed with the Elder Wand and enhanced by the malevolent spirit of an evil wizard? Dumbledore turned away from the window. The battle for the soul of their world was indeed upon them. Back in the Gryffindor Tower, Harry, Ron, and Hermione had spent what was left of the night dissecting the evening's events. The sun had long risen, and the trio found themselves exhausted, having delved deep in analyzing and recounting every detail until the early morning light signaled the day had begun anew. Now overwhelmed by fatigue, they retreated to their beds, their minds and bodies in desperate need of rest. Harry was left in a state of wonder and apprehension, having borne witness to the formidable and unnerving might of Professor Gandalf. He fell asleep within moments of his head hitting the pillow. However, rest brought no peace, as Harry was thrust back into his recurring nightmare. In his dream, again he saw Professor Gandalf, not as the ally he had known, but as a figure of darkness, wielding immense power, throwing the same small figure into the fiery abyss of a mountain, an act shadowed by the sinister gleam of a golden ring upon his finger. This night, however, the dream took an unexpected and far more terrifying turn. Gandalf, now cloaked in black robes, stood before legions of goblin-like creatures, commanding the fall of cities and the cold-blooded execution of prisoners. He directed Dementor-like entities, shrouded in black cloaks, to execute a defiant trio, a man, a dwarf, and an elf who stood valiantly against him, the last of their defeated resistance. The vision then shifted dramatically to reveal Gandalf seated upon a malevolent throne within a colossal black tower, a structure dwarfing any mountain, as he surveyed the agony below with a menacing smile. Harry woke with a start, his body slick with sweat, fear coursing through him. Glancing toward Ron's bed, he found the useless Ginger deep asleep, blissfully unaware of the turmoil that had seized his best friend. The clarity and ominous nature of his dream seemed too real to dismiss as mere figments of imagination. It resonated and repeated with a vividness that suggested a message, or warning perhaps. The enigmatic figure of their new professor, Gandalf, loomed large in Harry's mind. Despite Gandalf's facade of wisdom and benevolence, his true nature remained shrouded in mystery. Could it be that beneath the surface of apparent goodwill lay a more sinister intent? The possibility Gandalf could be an enemy in disguise, patiently orchestrating a grand scheme of deception and power-grabbing, chilled Harry to the bone, even under the warm covers of his bed. After all, it wouldn't have been the first time something like this had happened. Mad-Eye Moody had turned out to be an enemy in plain sight. Harry needed to find out the truth about Professor Gandalf's past. The stakes were far too high. The possibility that he and Dumbledore were on the verge of walking into a meticulously laid trap was a risk too great to ignore. There was a pressing need to act urgently, to pierce through the veil of mystery that surrounded Gandalf. At that moment, an idea sparked within him, a potential avenue to seek the answers that eluded them. He recalled the dream-enhancing potion he had perfectly brewed earlier in the school year during Slughorn's class. Now lying forgotten amidst the clutter at the bottom of his trunk, the potion presented a potential solution. Just as one could interact with figures within a magical painting, this potion would allow Harry to navigate his dreams with lucid intent, to probe deeper into the visions that haunted him for clues and information. Thankfully, classes were canceled for the remainder of the week, giving Harry time to fill Ron and Hermione in on the plan. Tonight, he would take the potion before bed and see what he could uncover. Tastes like shit, spluttered Harry, scrunching his eyes as he forced down the shit-flavored potion. Its effect was almost immediate, giving him just enough time to lie down under the observant gaze of Ron and Hermione. As he drifted into the deepest slumber, the potion began working its magic, not only deepening his immersion into the dream, but also expanding his comprehension of the world within which he stepped. The moment his consciousness touched the dreamscape, it was as if a veil had been lifted from his mind, granting him an innate knowledge of names, places, and the intricate lore that comprised the fabric of this alternate reality. The dream now became a profound odyssey of enlightenment, engaging all 5 of his senses. To his nose came new foreign aromas and fascinating smells. His ears now heard with an incredible depth sounds and noises he'd never before experienced in his dreams. If my dreams were always this vivid, I'd never want to wake up, he thought as he strolled around the gardens of Bag End, smelling the sweet aroma of freshly mown grass. Watching as 2 particularly foul-looking hobbits walked by him, the elderly female gifting him a dirty look as she deliberately bumped into him on the way past. "Dickhead!" shouted Harry, intuition telling him this grumpy hobbit was none other than Lobelia Sackville Baggins. Then suddenly, Harry found himself once more catapulted onto the slopes of Mount Doom. The thick stench of sulfur invaded his nostrils, almost making him retch. But he noticed this time something was different. His awareness of the environment and its inhabitants had been heightened 100-fold. Harry now recognized the significance of the One Ring in the scenes unfolding around him. He understood its power to corrupt and its central role in the fate of Middle-earth. Gandalf, Frodo, the Lords of Middle-earth, and even the Dark Lord Sauron were no longer mere characters in his dreams. They were now entities with deep histories, desires, and destinies that Harry felt intimately acquainted with. This Sauron character really is a scumbag, thought Harry as he watched Gandalf interact with Frodo at the precipice of Mount Doom in that last contest of power against the Dark Lord with a deepening sense of dread. He understood Gandalf's reason in that final moment, the decision he had taken to take the ring from Frodo and put it on. It was the only way he would stand a chance of pushing back the great enemy. And so, bitterly, he took the ring, preventing Sauron from regaining that which was lost. But in that moment, he realized what he had feared. The ring ensnared him, corrupting him, compelling him to claim it for himself, causing his subsequent treachery against Frodo, whom Harry now knew as the true ring-bearer, charged with destroying the ring. The resulting battles, previously a blur of chaos and bloodshed, now also became crystal clear to Harry. He now recognized the elves, dwarves, men, and other races of Middle-earth uniting under Gandalf's banner in final confrontation against the Dark Lord. Unbeknownst to them, also unwittingly serving to elevate Gandalf Ringbearer to a position of unchecked power once the enemy had been defeated. And so swords clashed, arrows flew, and spells were cast. Once the battle was won, Harry witnessed Gandalf's ascension to power and his subsequent domination of Middle-earth. Yet, it was in the quiet aftermath of his conquests, years later, as Gandalf sat alone atop the dark throne of Mordor, that Harry sensed a shift within the wizard, like the falling of small stones that starts an avalanche in the mountains. The initial triumph that had driven Gandalf's actions began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of isolation and regret. His friends were all dead, and by his own hand, no less. Realization dawned on Harry, even within his dream state, that power obtained through treachery was hollow, bringing no true contentment. Harry watched as Gandalf's inner turmoil deepened, and the old wizard grappled with the consequences of his decision, and his yearning for redemption grew. Eventually, after hundreds of years of solitude had passed, the old wizard finally cracked, leaving Barad-dûr in a desperate quest to make amends, and he journeyed to distant lands in desperate attempt to find a way to undo some of the damage that had been done. And after 500 years of toil, he finally found a way. Through the power of the ring, he managed to create the Resurrection Stone, which would allow him to communicate with his dead friends. And so, Gandalf was able to bring back Frodo, in a form more solid than Ghost, but less than a living body. Harry, fully immersed in the experience, felt the tension between Gandalf's profound remorse and Frodo's initial resentment. The process of forgiveness was neither swift nor painless. After some thoroughly un-Hobbit-like language, Frodo eventually forgave Gandalf, lightening the burden of guilt that had weighed down his old friend for almost a millennia. Next came the summons of Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, and their subsequent forgiveness of Gandalf, further enabling yet more redemption and reconciliation. But not before the dwarf Gimli had fulfilled his promise of putting an incurable dent in the wizard's hat with a spectral axe, which still had bite in its blade. Through Gandalf's journey from a corrupted, power-driven tyrant to a penitent steward of Middle-earth, Harry realized there was more to the old wizard than met the eye. As the dream continued, Gandalf embarked on a solitary journey that spanned 50,000 years, a silent observer to the rise and fall of empires and civilizations. Isengard, once a fortress of industrial might under Saruman's rule, transformed over millennia into the legendary kingdom of Atlantis. This new realm, a pinnacle of magic and technology, flourished under Gandalf's watchful eye until it too succumbed to the fate of all empires, sinking beneath the waves in a cataclysm of its own making. As centuries turned to millennia, Gandalf watched the dawn of human civilization across the globe. Ancient India's spiritual wisdom, China's imperial majesty, Egypt's architectural marvels, and Rome's disciplined legions all rose to prominence, each contributing to the record of human achievement. Gandalf's presence, felt but unseen, influenced the course of history in subtle ways, steering humanity away from the brink of self-destruction time and again. Throughout this long vigil, Gandalf's isolation weighed heavily upon him. The memory of his friends, their forgiveness, and the fellowship they had once shared became a source of both solace and sorrow. Despite the passage of time and the forgiveness granted, the burden of his past actions remained a constant companion. As 50,000 years passed, Gandalf's perspective on power, responsibility, and redemption evolved. The world he had known, Middle-earth, became the stuff of myth and legend, its stories woven into the fabric of the new ages that preceded it. As the dream neared its culmination, just before the veil of sleep lifted from Harry, things took another unexpected turn, drawing him into a final, captivating scene. Gandalf, wearing the One Ring, stood invisible to all others within the shadowy confines of the Department of Mysteries and the Ministry of Magic, watching as the Death Eaters attacked Harry and his friends. Harry watched, entranced, as Gandalf moved through the dimly lit hallways and approached the cabinet containing the last remaining time turners. Amidst the chaos, Gandalf, whether through sheer luck or fate, managed to pick up a time turner just seconds before the entire cabinet was blasted by a stray Death Eater curse, destroying all time turners remaining housed within it. Just as Gandalf turned the time turner, the dream began to fade, the edges of Harry's vision blurring as the pull of waking reality grew stronger. Yet, the image of Gandalf, time turner in hand, and the One Ring upon his finger remained etched in Harry's mind. Harry awoke with a start, the morning light filtering through the curtains of the Gryffindor dormitory. Wow, if that was a story, it would be the greatest story ever written, exclaimed Harry in awe at what he had just witnessed. Harry, what happened? Asked Hermione, her voice full of concern. Hermione, the fucking trees were walking. Chapter 7, Shadows of the Past. As the morning sun continued its climb into the sky, casting long, early shadows across the grounds of Hogwarts, Harry lay restless in his bed in the Gryffindor dormitory. The events of his dream, so vivid and alarming, replayed through his mind like a sinister premonition. The image of Gandalf, not as the wise and benevolent figure he had known, but as a dark, menacing force, unsettled him deeply. What do you mean the trees were walking? Asked Hermione sharply, snapping him out of his thoughts. I mean, whatever world Professor Gandalf has come from, it's nothing like ours. There were elves, and I don't mean like Dobby. I mean real elves with swords and bows and their own kingdoms. There were dwarves living in cities beneath mountains with mountains of gold and massive forges. Hermione, it was amazing. I would give up my firebolt to visit, responded Harry, feeling disappointed in the unimaginative wizarding world in which they dwelt, in comparison to the world of Middle-earth he had just seen. What? Dobby's ancestors had their own kingdoms? Asked the feeble-minded Ron, recollecting the pathetic existence of the house elf and struggling to imagine Dobby-like creatures with their own castles and palaces. "How long was I asleep?" asked Harry, ignoring Ron. "It's still morning. You were only out for a few minutes," responded Hermione. "But it felt like my dream lasted days. That doesn't make any sense." "Well, the potion is designed to enhance your dream, not your sleep, so I expect you don't need to be asleep long for it to do its job," answered Hermione in her typical knowledgeable fashion. "Your face was twitching and spasming the whole time. We thought you were having a stroke, mate," said Ron. Sitting up, Harry rubbed his eyes, the weight of an enormous moral quandary pressing down upon him. Could Professor Gandalf, the same person who had fought alongside them, who had brought hope, who had healed Dumbledore, really harbor such dark intentions? The discrepancy between the Gandalf he knew and the one in his dream was jarring. "What did you see, Harry?" asked Hermione. Harry hesitated before responding. "Professor Gandalf. I saw him in a way that I can't really explain. He wasn't the person we know. He was something else, something dark, maybe evil. Definitely evil, actually." Harry then spent the next hour filling Ron and Hermione in on key details of what he'd seen in his dream, the chronology of Gandalf's actions, and the little golden ring. Ron frowned, scratching his head. "So he killed his friend to steal his golden ring?" "It was more complicated than that. The ring he took from that child, his friend, was no normal ring. It held great powers, enough to destroy everything. But from what I could see, he took it to save the world from another Dark Lord, but it affected him and pulled him to the dark side, corrupting him. I don't know, Harry. He's been nothing but helpful since he got here. Maybe it's just Voldemort trying to mess with your mind." "I'm not sure," Harry admitted. "It felt real, more than just a nightmare. I think I need to keep digging. Find out the truth." Hermione stood up, her brows knitted in thought. "Maybe you should. But how? There are no records which go back 10,000 years, never mind 50,000. But Harry had already considered his next steps. He pulled out the Marauder's map from under his pillow and whispered, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." The map flickered to life, revealing the intricate details of Hogwarts. He quickly scanned it for Gandalf, finding a dot labeled Professor Gandalf in his office. "I think it's best if I talk to him directly and ask him straight tonight. I'll use the last of my Felix Felicis, just to be safe," Harry said, pulling out the tiny bottle of liquid luck he had saved. "And your invisibility cloak," Hermione added, always practical. "It's best to be cautious." Ron looked uneasy. "You sure about this, mate? Confronting a wizard like Gandalf based on a dream could be dangerous." "Very perceptive of you, Ron," said Hermione sarcastically. Harry nodded, his decision firm. "It's the only way to know for sure. I can't ignore what I saw. I have to find out if he's really on our side or if he's planning to betray us." With a plan agreed, Harry decided to wait until nightfall to act. Class that week had been canceled after the Death Eater attack on the castle, so the school was relatively quiet during the day, with students choosing to spend time off, enjoying the sunny weather in the grounds. As dusk approached, Harry prepared himself. He retrieved his invisibility cloak from his trunk, the fabric sliding cool and silent through his fingers. He returned to his dorm briefly to down the lucky potion, feeling the immediate surge of confidence and luck wash over him. "Be careful, Harry," Hermione said as he left the dormitory. Clad in his cloak, he made his way through the quiet evening corridors of Hogwarts towards Gandalf's office. His heart pounded with excitement and confidence from the effects of the potion. He reached Professor Gandalf's door, paused, and knocked. "Who is it?" came a roaring, gruff voice from behind the door. "Professor, it's Harry Potter," I need to speak with you. It's urgent." After a long wait, the door creaked open, revealing the dimly lit interior Professor Gandalf's office. Harry stepped inside cautiously, his eyes adjusting to the smoky haze that filled the room. The scent of pipe smoke hung heavy in the air, wrapping around him like a comforting embrace. "Professor Gandalf?" Harry called out, his voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Gandalf emerged from the shadow and smoky air. He gestured for Harry to take a seat opposite him beside the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames. "Ah, Mr. Potter," Gandalf greeted warmly. "Please, have a seat. Would you care for some long bottom leaf?" Harry hesitated for a moment before nodding, curious despite himself. Gandalf reached into a drawer of his desk and pulled out a small pouch and pipe, which he handed to Harry. With a practiced hand, Gandalf showed Harry how to fill the pipe and light it, the flame casting flickering shadows across his weathered face. As Harry took his first puff, he was surprised by the smoothness of the smoke, the taste of earth and complex flavors intriguing upon his palate. He relaxed into his chair, the tension in his shoulders melting away. "Yes, it's good, isn't it?" said Gandalf, a mellow expression on his face. They sat in silence for a few minutes, basking in the smoke. "Now, Mr. Potter," Gandalf began, his voice low and relaxed. "What is it that troubles you? I sense there is something weighing heavily on your mind. Take another hit from your pipe and tell me the lay of your thoughts." Harry inhaled deeply, then took a few moments to gather his thoughts as he held in the smoke for a time, eventually releasing with a small cough as he began to speak. "It's about something I saw," he confessed, his words smooth, almost rhythmic. "In my dream, I mean. You were there, but you were different. Darker. I don't understand what it means." "Spit it out, boy," barked the old wizard. He didn't look annoyed, but Harry sensed his failure to get swiftly to the point was irritating the old wizard. "Waste of good leaf," muttered the old wizard under his breath. Harry hesitated, suddenly feeling a surge of uncertainty under the keen eyes of the ancient wizard. How could he confront a wizard as powerful and enigmatic as Gandalf based on nothing but a dream? Yet, the memory of his vision lingered in his mind, a dark shadow that refused to be ignored, and the lucky potion urged him to press on. "It was more than just a dream, Professor," Harry finally said, his voice steadied by the lucky potion guiding his every inflection. "It felt real, like a memory or a vision of the past." Gandalf's expression remained impassive. "What did you see?" Harry took a deep breath and recounted the events of his dream in vivid detail, from Gandalf's transformation into a dark and tyrannical figure to the ominous presence of the golden ring that seemed to hold sway over them all. As he spoke, Harry watched Gandalf's face closely, searching for any hint of deception or evasion. But the old wizard's features gave nothing away. When Harry finally fell quiet, they sat in silence for a long while. At last, Gandalf spoke, his voice grave and full of sadness. "I cannot deny the truth of your words, Harry. What you saw is the burden I've carried for eons. Yes, it was by my own hand, but a hand which was forced to act to save all from a far worse Dark Lord than the one you now know. So my dream was true?" Harry was shocked at the frankness of Gandalf. He had expected evasiveness at being confronted. "It was, Harry, but you must hear the full tale before you judge my actions. But you killed your friend, that child, and stole his ring? That was no child." Gandalf's expression darkened, a shadow passing over his features like a terrible storm cloud. "The ring is a thing of great power, Harry," he said, his voice low and grave. "It holds within it the essence of darkness and corruption, a force that can consume even the strongest of wills. What I did was for the good of Middle-earth." Harry felt a chill run down his spine at Gandalf's words, a sense of foreboding settling over him. "And what about you, Professor?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Are you still the same Gandalf we know?" "I am who I have always been, Harry," he said. "My path was fraught with perils, and I cannot promise you that I did not falter at times. Now hold your tongue and do not interrupt while I tell you the full tale." Harry nodded, taking another long draw of smoke from the pipe. "Before I tell you of my story, I must first tell you the tale of the ring, of its creation, and of the Dark Lord Sauron who forged it in the fires of Mount Doom." And so, in the dimly lit confines of Gandalf's office, Harry listened as the old wizard recounted the ancient history of Middle-earth, of the war between the free peoples and the dark forces of the great enemy, and of the ring that held the power to control them all. He spoke of the One Ring, of its corrupting influence, and of the great quest to destroy it once and for all. As Gandalf spoke, waving his hands animatedly as he told his tale, Harry's imagination returned to images he seen in his dream, his mind transported back to that world of myth and legend. He listened intently as Gandalf spoke of the Fellowship of the Ring, of their perilous journey across Middle-earth, and of the sacrifices they had made along the way, of Boromir the brave and the glorious riding of the Rohirrim. And then came the final moment. "Upon the slopes of Mount Doom," Gandalf continued, his voice grave, "Frodo, the Ring-bearer, stood face to face with Sauron, the Dark Lord himself, his willpower tested to the limit as he struggled to resist the ring's pull. Damn, Professor Gandalf can tell a fantastic tale when he has a mind to," thought Harry as he leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest, listening as Gandalf recounted the climactic moment of the story. The fate of Middle-earth hanging in the balance. He could almost feel the heat of the fires of Mount Doom, hear the clash of swords at the Morannon before the Black Gates. "I was left with a terrible choice, Harry. Take the ring from my friend and forsake him, risking corruption through the ring, or let it return to the hand of its maker. I made the right decision, but victory was fruitless. I decided to take the chance and trust in myself rather than submit to utter ruin. But why did you have to kill him? He was just a child." "Silence," barked Gandalf, annoyed at being interrupted. He looked slightly mad but regained his composure almost instantly, before once again continuing. "Given its hold upon Frodo, he would not give the ring to me willingly, and time was of the essence. There was but a brief moment before the Dark Lord descended, so I had no choice but to take it by force. I took Frodo's hand with a swipe of Glamdring, recovering the ring in time and putting it on. I have never felt such power in my long life. The mountain trembled beneath my feet, as did the Dark Lord before me. I put an end to him. A final end. But what happened to Frodo, Professor? He tried to take back the ring. Such was its hold upon him. So, I threw him into the fire, for no longer would he find peace in Middle-earth, seeing it upon my hand. Also, it would have been too hard to explain taking the ring in his hand, so I told everyone it had been the enemy who had killed our friend, and I had managed to save the ring from falling into his grasp." Harry sat in stunned silence. Once the dust had settled, the lords of Middle-earth urged I destroy the ring. But why? I challenged. The Dark Lord was no more. It remained, a hard-fought gift to repair the damage its maker had wrought. But they would not listen, and so I was left with no choice but to destroy them in hope of a truly new beginning by my own design. He took another long draw from his pipe, the complex smoke swirling around him before he continued. I should have known better, but the ring already had a hold on me. My will was no longer my own to command. It had already become corrupted by the ring's evil, leading me down a dark path for a very long time. I killed many an elf, dwarf, and man who dared challenge my rule and seat upon the throne of Mordor and the lordship of Middle-earth. The remaining elves fled to the west. Harry recalled the execution of the elf, dwarf, and man from his dream. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, he muttered under his breath. The dream-enhancing potion had enlightened him to the names of these valiant warriors. Gandalf's keen ears caught the names Harry had whispered, his eyes widening in shock. How do you know these names? He asked in alarm. There is not now any record remaining with their mention. I heard them in my dream, Professor. Gandalf looked visibly troubled. This is deeply troubling, my dear hobbit. Then these are not mere chance visions you are seeing. There is something else at work here. Come closer, so I may probe your mind. Harry leaned forward, allowing Gandalf to place a hand atop his head. Suddenly, he felt a falling sensation and after a few moments, found himself standing atop an enormous tower of rock, masterfully fashioned into a dwelling. Welcome to Orthanc. Once home to Saruman the White, before he was expelled from the Order and his staff taken. What did you do with him? I crucified him and Grima in Isengard for their treachery. Upon this very spot, actually, Gandalf replied with a casual air. Nice, but why are we here now, Professor? Now that you are no longer bound by a Horcrux to Voldemort, he can no longer implant visions in your mind, the same way he once did. I suspect it is actually Saruman, who is invading your dreams, and upon probing your mind, I found anchor points to this place. We are within the mind of Saruman. Eventually, he will realize we are here, Gandalf explained with a smirk. Can he stop us? If he knows we're here, he may attempt to trap us, as our minds are currently separate from our living bodies. Any who stumble upon us may assume we are asleep. He can trap us in here? Harry asked in alarm. Or kill us, in which case our bodies too will perish without a living mind, replied Gandalf. What? Said Harry in alarm, as fear once again gripped him. If he died in his sleep, then that useless Ginger Ron would steal his firebolt and probably his invisibility cloak too. How likely is that, Professor? He asked, trying his best to mask any sign of fear. Oh, not very likely, I think. Even in his own mind, I am still more powerful than him with the ring. Thank God for that, whispered Harry. There is a clue here which could explain how he is penetrating your mind. We must search Orthanc. Gandalf pointed an old, manky-looking finger at the solid rock under their feet, and there appeared a trapdoor, descending many thousand steps to Saruman's living quarters and study. Stay close, he said, leading the way down the impossibly narrow stairs, and after an exhausting descent, which seemed never-ending, they eventually reached the residence of Saruman. As they began their search of Orthanc, Harry found himself captivated by the new world unfolding around him. Every corner of Saruman's home seemed to hold mysterious artifacts or fascinating objects. Gandalf moved with purpose, his keen eyes scanning the room for the clue they were looking for. Meanwhile, Harry trailed behind, his curiosity getting the better of him as he examined the various artifacts scattered throughout the chamber. He marveled at the intricate designs carved into the black obsidian walls, the shelves adorned with ancient tomes, and the strange contraptions that seemed to defy the laws of nature and physics. Hermione would sacrifice every house elf that ever existed to spend a day in here, thought Harry, smiling to himself. As Gandalf sifted through the ancient parchments, Harry's curiosity burned brighter than ever. He couldn't help but wonder about the fate of Middle-earth, about the remnants of the world long gone but still lingering in the shadows of history. Does this place still exist in the world, Professor? Harry asked eagerly. What happened to Middle-earth? Is it all destroyed? Gandalf paused, his gaze drifting off into the distance as if lost in memory. Some remains. Much has perished or is now hidden, concealed by enchantment. What remains, Professor? Harry pressed excitedly, his eagerness growing by the second. He yearned to learn more about this world that existed beyond the pages of his dreams. The mines of Moria, as does the kingdom of Erebor and parts of Fangorn and Mirkwood. Where? I would love to go and see these places one day, Professor, asked Harry eagerly. Perhaps when this is all over, I shall take you, replied Gandalf, as his gaze returned to the mess of scroll before him. Ah, I found it, Gandalf announced suddenly, rising sharply from his seat and pulling Harry from his thoughts. Saruman Ringmaker indeed. What is it, Professor? That devious traitor. I knew he'd try it. It was in his nature after all, scowled Gandalf. It would appear he fashioned himself a ring of his own. A lesser ring, but it would explain much, including his ability to penetrate your mind, Harry. Before Gandalf could finish his sentence, a booming voice filled the chamber, echoing off the hard rock walls. "So, you have found my secret, Gandalf. The means of my return," boomed the menacing voice of Saruman, chilling Harry to the bone. "We know of your treachery, Saruman," Gandalf declared loudly, seemingly unfazed. "Your lust for power has clouded your judgment. It is you who has lusted for power, killing your friends to gain it. You stole what was rightfully mine as head of the Order." "The ring belongs to me," bellowed Gandalf. Saruman's voice dripped with malice as he responded, though his form remained unseen. "You will pay the ultimate price, fool." As Saruman spoke, the Tower of Orthanc began to tremble, the very stones quivering with his venomous rage. "I will unleash a power greater and more deadly than that of the ring," he declared ominously. "All will be destroyed, but your punishment will be saved for last." Before Gandalf could respond, they were jolted awake from their dreamlike state by a terrified-looking Dobby who had appeared in the chamber. Startled, Gandalf raised his staff, striking Dobby across the room with a burst of magic. "Merlin's beard, Dobby," exclaimed Gandalf, exasperated at the elf's repeated misfortune at his hands. Dobby scrambled to his feet, his movements unsteady. "Dobby is sorry, Professor Gandalf, sir," he stammered, his large eyes wide. "Dobby did not mean to startle you, but the castle is under attack." "What?" shouted Harry and Gandalf together. "Yes, under attack by trolls, goblins, dark wizards, and wolves, thousands of them." Gandalf's eyes narrowed. "We must act quickly," he said, turning to look out of the window onto the castle grounds, where they could hear the echoes of chaos and destruction. "Where is Professor Dumbledore?" Gandalf asked, his voice full of urgency. "He's on the other side of the castle." "There are too many of them, Professor Gandalf, sir. He sent me to ask for your help." Gandalf's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger flashing in his eyes. "Saruman," he muttered darkly. "Too swiftly he has moved, in fear of our discovery, but no matter," said Gandalf, slipping a hand into an inner pocket of his robe and pulling out a shiny gold ring, which he slipped onto his finger. Instantly, a surge of power filled the room, knocking Harry and Dobby off their feet and sending them crashing into the far wall. "It is time," Gandalf declared, his voice grown in power. "It is time to call upon the Nazgul." Harry Potter and Gandalf the White. Chapter 8, The Great Battle of Our Time, Part 1. Harry and Gandalf stood by the window, watching the chaos unfolding on the grounds beneath them. Just then, the air was pierced with a blood-curdling scream. They turned to look for the source only to see swarms of Dementors in the sky above the Forbidden Forest, gliding towards the school, their cloaks billowing ominously as they sucked warmth and hope from the air, causing students and staff to flee in terror. "It is time for the return of the Nine," thundered Gandalf beside him, raising his arms in summoning motion. A bone-chilling screech filled the air, announcing the arrival of 9 cloaked Dementor-like creatures with long black iron swords at their sides, appearing as if from thin air and forming a boundary line between the castle and the oncoming Dementors. Harry doubted they needed any weapon other than dread. Their presence brought an even deeper terror, a dread so potent. Like the opposite of a Patronus, a nightmare made whole and visible. Harry felt the chill of the Dementors' retreat as the Nazgul's terror took hold. The Dementors, normally the embodiment of fear, recoiled from the Nazgul, their dark forms wavering. What on earth were these creatures? Thought a wide-eyed Harry, feeling a tremor run through his body even at this distance. The creatures drew their ancient notched swords, their blades darker than the surrounding night. With a chilling battle cry, they fell upon the Dementors, their movements heavy yet deadly. The foremost Dementor was beheaded with a swift cut, sending its head flying to the foot of the castle, where those teachers and students present witness for the first time what was under the Dementor's hood. Those defeated dissipated into dark mist and shadow, eventually being carried away with the wind. What are they, Professor? They are the original servants of terror, the forefathers of the Dementors, whom now they fall upon. The Dementors now resemble only pale imitation of the true power of the Nazgul. Harry watched, transfixed to the horror that unfolded beneath them upon the grounds. The once mighty Dementors were being cut down with frightening ease. Those that remained fled back towards the forest. Perhaps for the first time, they had experienced fear, and found they did not like its taste. The grounds of Hogwarts had truly become a battlefield as more enemies swarmed in from all directions. Gandalf, beside him, observed the work of his servants with a cold smile. "The Nazgul," he said quietly, with a grim satisfaction. "They are terror incarnate, a force that even the Dementors cannot withstand." Harry nodded, unable to tear his eyes away from the spectacle below. The Nazgul's very presence seemed to sap the strength of their enemies. Even the dark wizards and creatures attacking the castle hesitated, their advance faltering under the sheer weight of the Ringwraith's malevolence. "We must aid them," Gandalf said, turning to Harry. "The battle is far from won, and may yet turn against us." With a flick of his staff, Gandalf conjured a protective barrier around the castle, reinforcing the wards that were already in place. Harry, steeling himself for the fight ahead, gripped his wand tightly, spinning in the direction of the door. "Hold a moment," said Gandalf firmly. "I have something for you." Harry turned to see Gandalf hold out his hand. In his palm sat a silver ring set with a dazzling red gem. "What is it, Professor?" "It is the Elven Ring of Fire, Neria, given to me by Círdan. Great power will it grant the wearer." He motioned for Harry to take it. Doing due, Harry felt a strong wave of heat wash over him. "Put it on," instructed Gandalf, "and feel its power." Harry did as told and felt a fiery strength ignite within him. A powerful blast of sparks shot out of his wand, leaving scorch marks and burning embers upon the wooden floor. Before Harry could ask any questions, Gandalf handed him another ring. "And this is a gift for Miss Granger. It is the Elven Ring. Nenya, she will know what to do with it." And without further explanation, Gandalf quickly grabbed his hat from the stand and ran to the door. "Come, there is no time for instructions. You must discover the ring's power for yourself." Harry followed swiftly behind. Together, they stepped out of the office and made their way down to the castle grounds. The Nazgul's presence had turned the tide of the battle for the moment, but the defenders of Hogwarts still needed reinforcements. On the way, Harry peered through a broken window, and desperation filled his heart at what he saw. There were too many of them. Thousands of enemies streamed in from all sides. Great goblin-like creatures, trolls, giant spiders, wolves, all mustered around the barrier which Gandalf had conjured, halting their assault for the time being. He steadied his racing heart, remembering Dumbledore and Gandalf were yet among them, and as long as they had them, there was still hope. As Harry and Gandalf reached the castle grounds, they were met by Professor Dumbledore, the Elven Ring Vilya upon his finger, flanked by the teachers of Hogwarts and members of the Order of the Phoenix. Dumbledore's eyes shone as if with a blue flame, and his presence alone seemed to bolster the defenders' spirits. "Albus," Gandalf greeted, inclining his head slightly. "The situation is dire, but not yet hopeless." "Indeed, Gandalf," Dumbledore replied, his voice calm but carrying a steely note. "The attack was sudden and seems to have been long in the making. The enemy has for now been pushed back. We must regroup in anticipation of the next assault, assuming they manage to breach the barrier. It will linger but for another brief moment," said Gandalf. As if on cue, as the defenders discussed a defense plan, Gandalf's protective barrier around the castle and grounds began to flicker and then shattered with a resounding crack as if made from glass, filling the night sky with blinding sparks like an almighty firework. The enemy forces, sensing an opportunity, surged forward with renewed ferocity. Just then, Gandalf slammed his staff upon the ground, the impact resonating like thunder, shaking the ground beneath their feet. In a voice that carried for miles, he bellowed, "You shall not pass!" To the amazement of Harry and the other defenders, the power in Gandalf's words halted the advancing enemy for a moment, confusion and uncertainty spreading through their ranks. Dumbledore took advantage of this brief respite. "Harry," he said, turning to face him, "your task is to evacuate the students. Get them to safety. There is no way out of the castle now, so you must take them into the Chamber of Secrets. Once all are gathered there, barricade the entrance, though those of age who wish to fight may do so." "What about me, Professor?" asked Harry, conscious that he was still a year away from being of age. "You, Mr. Weasley and Miss Granger are permitted to join the defense. Now go and be careful." "Yes, Professor," said Harry, his heart pounding. "Do not forget the power of Narya," Gandalf said quickly as Harry turned back to the castle. "It will aid you in protecting those who cannot protect themselves." Harry took a deep breath and nodded, then sprinted back into the castle. The hallways were filled with the frightened faces of students, their eyes wide with fear. He quickly rallied the prefects and began organizing the evacuation. Outside, Dumbledore put his wand to his throat and addressed the school, his voice magically echoing throughout the castle. "All students, please make your way swiftly to the Great Hall. Our school is under attack. Everyone, follow me," Harry shouted, trying to keep his voice steady and his eyes open for Ron and Hermione. As he moved through the castle, Harry caught glimpses of the battle outside through the windows. The Nazgul were holding back all manner of monstrous-looking creatures streaming in from the forest line. Their terror sufficient to keep all but the boldest from advancing. Those who dared challenge were cut down mercilessly or struck blind with terror as they experienced the Nazgul's black breath. Back at the main entrance, Dumbledore gave final orders. "Minerva, you must organize the teachers, order members, and students willing to fight in the defense. You will need to cover the towers and remaining entrances. Professor Gandalf and I will hold the main entrance while these specters," he said, pointing towards the Nazgul, "hold the forest line." "But Albus—" "There is no time, Minerva," said Dumbledore firmly. "Go now, before the horde is upon us." With a nod, she turned in the direction of the school and immediately began assigning positions to the other defenders. That left the two lone figures before the enormous main entrance of Hogwarts, the greatest wizards of their ages, holding the line against the monstrous hordes of Voldemort and Saruman. Their partnership in that hour was a thing to behold and would be remembered in the books of lore and legend. The wolves were the first to reach within striking distance, their eyes gleaming with feral hunger. With a swift motion, Gandalf raised his staff, and a brilliant white light erupted from its tip, blinding the advancing wolves and sending them into disarray. Dumbledore followed with a powerful incantation, sending bolts of blue energy streaking through the air, striking down the nearest attackers. "On your right, Gandalf!" Dumbledore shouted as a pack of wolves broke through the Nazgul's line, lunging at them with terrifying speed. Gandalf responded by drawing his sword, Glamdring, its blade shining with a cold silver light. In a swift arc, he swung the blade, cleaving through the closest wolves. The strikes of Gandalf's sword appeared uncommonly heavy, a single strike knocking back and killing half a dozen enemies at a time. Dumbledore, his wand a blur, cast spell after spell. Enormous fiery serpents coiled around the legs of the oncoming trolls, causing them to bellow in pain and stumble. With a flick of his wrist, he conjured a powerful gust of wind, scattering the goblins that tried to swarm around them. Each movement was graceful yet unbelievably powerful. So spectacular was the display of power and mastery of magic demonstrated by Dumbledore and Gandalf that many students, teachers, and Death Eaters alike had forgotten the battle and simply watched, mesmerized. However, despite their combined efforts, the onslaught from their enemies seemed endless and at times threatened to overwhelm their position, and that of the Nazgul. Massive trolls, dragging enormous clubs across the once pristine grounds, now advanced towards the castle at speed, tearing through lines of assembled goblins. Gandalf stepped forward, his eyes blazing with fire, and raised his staff, jabbing it in their direction. From its tip emanated 1,000 phantom swords, butchering the trolls in an explosion of blood and flesh. "Is this all you can conjure, Saruman?" bellowed Gandalf in defiance. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream filled the air. Gandalf and Dumbledore turned to see a group of students attempting to come to their aid, being set upon by a swarm of nightmarish-looking spiders the size of large vehicles. The arachnids fired webbing, ensnaring the students and immobilizing them. The largest and foremost spider was inches from sinking its fangs into the head of a fallen student. Dumbledore's eyes flashed with fury. "None shall harm the students of Hogwarts while I yet live," he exploded, breaking his usual calm in an uncharacteristic anger none had borne witness to before. He pointed his wand at the largest spider, and with the force of a small bomb, sent it rocketing 1,000 feet into the air. It disappeared with a faint shriek, leaving the other spiders confused. With another wave of his wand, Dumbledore set the remaining spiders ablaze. The fire roared to life, engulfing each creature in an inferno. They bolted back in retreat, screeching in pain, setting all they touched ablaze as they fled. As the last spider disappeared into the darkness, a chilling shriek pierced the air from the far side of the castle. Gandalf and Dumbledore turned toward the sound, their expressions grave. "It's the cry of your Nazgul," shouted Dumbledore. "They are being overrun." Gandalf's eyes narrowed. "We must not let the enemy break through the forest line," he shouted. "They cannot reach the castle." He raised his staff high, its light blazing against the night sky, and called out in a commanding voice, "Radagast!" From the depths of the Forbidden Forest, a sleigh pulled by dozens of powerful-looking rabbits burst forth, racing towards the castle. At the reins stood Radagast the Brown, his eyes sharp and alert. The sleigh came to a halt beside Gandalf, and Radagast leapt down with surprising agility for one of his age. "Gandalf," he said in a panic, "what do you need of me?" "Radagast, the forest line is in danger of breach. You must work with Hagrid and your creatures to hold it. Do not let any enemy pass." Radagast nodded grimly. "Hagrid and I will do what we can. But where is he?" "He comes now," said Dumbledore, pointing his wand in the direction of Hagrid's cabin from where a large shadow fast approached. "Sorry, Professor. Must have fallen asleep," said Hagrid tensely, holding his pink umbrella. "What the ruddy hell is going on?" "We're under attack. There is no time to explain. Aid Radagast and the Nazgul in holding the enemy back from the forest." "We'll hold him off, Professor. Don't you worry." "Wait a moment, Hagrid," called Gandalf. "You are too exposed without armor or weapon other than your fists, large though they may be." He tapped Hagrid's shoulder with the tip of his staff, causing a flash of blinding light, which once dissipated, revealed Hagrid in black obsidian armor, with an enormous two-handed black sword in hand. "This armor will provide some protection from the enemy. May it serve you well. Go now, hold the line." Hagrid looked at the sword in awe, then nodded. "Thank you, Professor. I'll make sure none of them get through." With Radagast beside him upon his sleigh, Hagrid rocketed toward the forest, his massive frame visible from afar. He cut through a dozen goblins with a single arc of his new blade. A large orc captain who managed to duck beneath his swing and slash his own blade with all his might at Hagrid's leg was foiled by Hagrid's new armor. The blade shattered upon impact, to the shock of the orc, who a moment later was cut clean in half by Hagrid's next swing, shattering his helmet with the force of the blow and cleaving him in half from head to groin. The others fell back in dismay at the effortless defeat of their captain. The creatures of the forest, sensing Radagast's arrival, began to gather around him. Centaurs, hippogriffs, and thestrals formed ranks, ready to defend their home. Gandalf and Dumbledore turned back to the castle, where the main entrance was under heavy assault once more. This was only the first wave of the assault. The weakest, designed only to gauge our defenses. "Now will come the true test," Gandalf said, his voice unwavering as he spotted from a distance Death Eaters joining the battle. "We must hold this position, no matter the cost." Dumbledore nodded. "For Hogwarts." "For Frodo," whispered Gandalf quietly to himself. The two great wizards returned to the fray, determined to up the ante, for neither had yet unveiled their full might. Gandalf yet held in reserve the ring, which alone was sufficient to guarantee them victory. He preferred to avoid unleashing its dark power unless no alternative remained. Dumbledore, on the other hand, yet held back his most destructive spells, those learned and developed in his time long ago with Grindelwald, when the dream had been the greater good. Dumbledore's wand flashed with rapid, precise spells, each one finding its mark and neutralizing threats with surgical efficiency. His rediscovered youth and the power of the Elven Ring enhanced his combat and dueling capability greatly. Suddenly, to their surprise, there came an unexpected pause in the onslaught of goblins, trolls, wolves, and lesser creatures. "Where are they going?" asked Dumbledore. "It is the deep breath before the plunge," said Gandalf. "Our enemy is altering his battle plan. Throwing fodder at the castle has not borne the fruit he had hoped." A deeply unsettling silence descended, filling the defenders with uncertainty as to their enemy's next move. Had the attackers given up, or would sudden assault resume without warning? Gandalf and Dumbledore stood alone before the grand entrance, peering out into the smoky blackness and across the charred grass. As the silence stretched on, Dumbledore's keen eyes narrowed. "There are shadows moving," he said quietly. Gandalf gripped his staff tightly and looked out. The One Ring allowed him to see far into the dark. Its magic heightened his senses and granted him a clarity beyond normal sight. "What can you see, Gandalf?" Gandalf scanned the darkness. "Dark wizards approach," he murmured. "Very many of them." "How many?" asked Dumbledore defiantly. Without another word, Gandalf raised his staff high above his head, as he had done long ago in the depths of Moria, summoning a blinding light. The front of Hogwarts blazed with a brilliant, pure light, banishing the darkness and revealing the terrifying sight before them. What they saw sent chills down their spines and those of the defenders of Hogwarts who had been gazing out of the towers and windows. The grounds of Hogwarts were surrounded by hundreds of thousands of troops. At the forefront stood hundreds of Death Eaters, their wands raised, ready to enter the assault. Behind them, a mass of monstrous creatures and dark forces stretched as far as the eye could see. How on earth did Voldemort and Saruman amass such an army? Thought Gandalf in alarm. The sheer size of the enemy's forces was unbelievable. A force that seemed insurmountable even for the combined powers of Hogwarts and its allies. "Gandalf," said Dumbledore, dismay evident in his voice, "we are vastly outnumbered. Even for our combined might, I fear our doom may be inevitable." "Nay, my good Albus, Hogwarts will not fall this day." Gandalf smiled back at him. He then turned back to address all within the castle in a carrying voice. "Prepare for battle." The defenders of Hogwarts, now fully aware of the odds they were facing, having witnessed with their own eyes the enemy's overwhelming numbers, steeled themselves for the battle ahead. Teachers, students, and members of the Order of the Phoenix stood side by side, their wands at the ready, determined looks upon their faces. Professor McGonagall could be seen hurriedly leading a group of students to reinforce gaps in the defense. "Hold your positions. Hogwarts needs you," she barked. Once again, Gandalf and Dumbledore took their places at the front of the castle's main entrance, their combined presence a beacon of hope for all those within. All bore witness to their headmaster in defense against the dark arts teacher, bravely fighting the horde of monsters outside to protect those within. The light from Gandalf's staff still illuminated the grounds, blinding the orcs and offering clear visibility for those firing spells from the towers and broken windows. "It is time to unleash the full power of Vilya, Albus," said Gandalf. Dumbledore glanced down at the sapphire ring upon his healed hand. He closed his eyes, focusing his entire being upon it. The ring felt like a living entity with a soul of its own upon his finger, welcoming its new master to invoke its power. In response, Dumbledore raised his hand, palm outstretched. Suddenly, the first wave of Death Eaters advanced without warning, firing jets of green light towards the defenders. Gandalf raised his staff again, but before he could act, a loud whoosh filled the air, like the sound of a dam bursting. Dumbledore had commanded the lake to rise up into a violent tsunami-like flood, which slammed into the Death Eaters, washing away many who had not been quick enough to get out of the way in time. The water then formed into a living moat between the attackers and defenders, rising up and swatting away any who now attempted to cross. Those attackers left on the wrong side of the moat were mercilessly dispatched by the Nazgul, who had been growing in terror and stature, drawing power from their master's ring, now so close at hand. Harry, meanwhile, led the underage students through the castle, guiding them towards the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets. Finally, he spotted Ron and Hermione racing down towards the Great Hall, helping to herd the younger students along. "Ron, Hermione!" Harry called, relief flooding through him at the sight of his friends. "We need to get everyone to the Chamber of Secrets. Professor Dumbledore and Gandalf are holding off the enemy to buy us time." "But what happened? Why are we being attacked? Why are you glowing?" asked Ron, scrutinizing Harry as he came closer. "Glowing?" repeated Harry, looking down at himself, and sure enough, there was a faint red aura around him, like a thin flame enveloping him. "I don't know. It must be the ring Gandalf gave me. There's no time to explain." He spoke as quickly as he could. Time was of the essence. "Professor Dumbledore and Gandalf are leading the defense. We're under attack from Voldemort and his armies. We need to get everyone into the Chamber of Secrets." "But what about the Horcruxes?" interrupted Hermione. "Surely you'll need those to defeat Voldemort." "Damn, I forgot about the Horcrux," responded Harry, clapping a hand to his forehead in frustration. "We'll worry about them once everyone's safe in the Chamber of Secrets." "Okay, let's go." The trio worked together, ushering students that had been gathered in the Great Hall up to the second-floor girls' bathroom and into the hidden passage. Harry paused and looked back at the castle grounds out of a broken window before he too entered the passage. The battle was frighteningly intense. The defenders were holding their ground, but clearly straining against the overwhelming numbers. Once everyone was safely in the chamber, beside the skeletal remains of the basilisk, Harry used Parseltongue to seal the entrance, assuring those inside that they'd be safe and promising to return for them once the fighting was over. "What now?" asked Ron, his face dirty and beaded with sweat. "We need to ask Dumbledore about the Horcruxes," replied Harry. "But where is he?" "He's on the grounds with Gandalf, fighting the Death Eaters." "Let's go then," said Hermione, hurrying toward the door. "Wait, Hermione," called Harry, remembering something. "I have something for you, from Professor Gandalf. He said it would help." Harry held out the elven ring, Nenya accidentally revealing his own ring as he did so, which Ron immediately noticed. "Wow," said Ron, looking at both rings enviously. "Did he send one for me?" "No, Ron," replied Harry, thinking fast. "He didn't have time. I think he'll give you yours in person." Harry then turned back to Hermione, who had taken the ring. "I don't have time to explain, but it's a ring of power," he said quickly. "You'll understand when you put it on." As instructed, Hermione put on the ring, and to the boys' astonishment, the transformation was instant. A subtle yet unmistakable energy began to emanate from her, causing the hairs on the back of Harry and Ron's necks to stand on end. She immediately straightened up as though her self-doubt had been lifted, replaced by a calm confidence. "How do you feel?" asked Harry, grinning at the change. "Our quest stands upon the edge of a knife," she said in an ethereal, almost unrecognizable voice, catching both Harry and Ron by surprise. "Stray but a little, and it will fail to the ruin of all." Harry and Ron stood speechless. "I know what it is you saw," said a voice in Harry's head. It was Hermione. Without explanation, Harry intuitively knew she meant his dream. He realized he could also communicate telepathically with her. Then suddenly another voice came into their minds, Albus Dumbledore. "Harry, Hermione, you must go to my office and retrieve the vial holding the portion of Voldemort's soul extracted from you, Harry. There you will also find the sword of Gryffindor. Bring both to me, quickly." "Yes, Professor," Harry and Hermione replied in unison. At that moment, their telepathic communication was interrupted by a gentle, almost endearing voice reverberating throughout the castle and grounds. "You have all fought valiantly. I commend you," said the voice. The sound of fighting stopped. Defenders and attackers alike paused, lowering their arms as they listened, mesmerized by the power of the voice. None who heard could reject its pleas without great struggle. "My forces will withdraw until midnight, giving you time to collect your dead. I extend my hand to you all in a generous offer. Join me and live. Give me Harry Potter, and there will be no more death. You will all be free to leave the castle unharmed. Against my power, there can be no victory. All who refuse shall suffer an agonizing death. You have 1 hour to decide, life or painful death." "It is the voice of Saruman," whispered Hermione. Harry Potter and Gandalf the White. Chapter 9, The New Shadow. "Who's Saruman?" asked Ron, still mesmerized by the voice and looking up at Harry with dazed eyes as though considering the offer. "A dark wizard from another time who has joined with Voldemort," responded Hermione in her new ethereal tone. "He's responsible for my nightmares," said Harry bitterly. "Snap out of it, Ronald," shouted Hermione, giving Ron a sharp prod in the ribs with her elbow. "We have a job to do." Ron blinked, shaking his head clear of the trance. "Right, sorry," he muttered, finally snapping out of the voice's spell. "Let's go," said Harry, leading the way out of the chamber. They moved swiftly and silently through the castle's corridors, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The silence almost suffocating after the deafening clamor of battle. They raced to Dumbledore's office, on the way passing defenders who walked as if under a heavy trance, congregating in the Great Hall. The hypnotic effect of Saruman's voice was evident in their vacant expressions. "Put on your cloak, Harry," hissed Hermione, who had not failed to notice the looks Harry was getting from both teachers and students. Clearly, the voice had had a hypnotic effect on those who heard it, but not Harry and Hermione. Had their new rings protected them? Thought Hermione. Quickly, Harry threw the invisibility cloak over himself, and they continued their hurried journey through the castle. Finally, they reached the stone gargoyle guarding the entrance to Dumbledore's office. Harry whispered the password, "Acid Pops," and the gargoyle sprang aside, allowing them to rush up the spiral staircase and into the office. Dumbledore's office was as Harry remembered it, unaffected by the battle, filled with strange and wonderful objects, and the ever-watchful portraits of former headmasters and headmistresses. Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, let out a soft squawk of encouragement from his perch. Harry went straight to the desk, finding the vial with the portion of Voldemort's soul and the sword of Gryffindor just as Dumbledore had instructed. He grabbed both items and turned to leave. But before they could exit, one of the portraits spoke. "I've seen that locket before," said the portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black. "There is one like it in Grimmauld Place." "You've seen what?" asked Ron. But he was cut off by Hermione. "I remember. How could I forget? It was in the cabinet we cleared out," exclaimed Hermione loudly, clapping a frustrated hand to her forehead. "Remember, no one could open it." Harry almost dropped the sword of Gryffindor in shock. He recalled the little locket Sirius had thrown in the trash when they had cleared out the dusty old sitting room. "Sirius threw it out," snarled Harry in frustration, banging his fist on Dumbledore's table, causing the Phoenix to squawk angrily. "Wait," said Hermione, holding up a hand. Maybe Creature managed to save it. He did sneak a lot of stuff back to his bedroom. Without a moment's hesitation, Harry summoned the old house elf. "Creature," he called loudly. There was a sharp crack, and the disheveled house elf appeared before them, standing upon Dumbledore's desk. "Master," called Creature. "Creature, did you take a locket out of the rubbish when we were clearing Grimmauld Place last year? A locket that looked like this?" He held up the fake locket for Creature to see. Creature's eyes widened with a mix of fear and sorrow. He hesitated, his bony fingers twisting anxiously. "Master means the locket that Master Regulus took." "Master Regulus?" repeated Harry in confusion, but Hermione pressed on. "Yes, Creature," she said in a soft voice. "We need to know what happened." "The mudblood is talking to Creature," muttered the house elf while looking around, pretending not to have heard Hermione. "Don't you dare call Hermione that," bellowed Harry, but he was cut off. "We don't have time for that," hissed Hermione. Harry grit his teeth. She was right. He took a deep breath, calming himself before addressing the loathsome house elf again. "Creature, tell us everything you know about Master Regulus's locket." The house elf took a deep, shuddering breath and began explaining how Master Regulus had sacrificed his life to recover the locket and sworn Creature not to tell his family what had happened. "Do you still have it?" asked Harry hurriedly, his heart racing. "Yes, Master." "Bring it to us, Creature, quickly," Harry ordered. But Creature did not immediately move to follow his new master's orders. "We needed to complete Master Regulus's work," Hermione followed up. At this, Creature's expression softened. "From Master Regulus," he whispered before nodding and disapparating. He reappeared a few minutes later, clutching the locket in his gnarled hands. They couldn't believe their good fortune, but there was no time to stop and celebrate. Harry took the locket carefully. This had to be the real Horcrux. He could feel dark magic radiating from within its cold metal casing. "Thank you, Creature. You've helped us finish Master Regulus's work. Now go, help the other house elves defend the castle." "Yes, Master," Creature nodded and disapparated again. As Harry turned to leave again, a glint of something caught his eye. It was one of the deathly hallows Dumbledore has shown him months ago. The ring set with the resurrection stone sat upon their headmaster's desk. Harry paused for a moment, then picked up the ring and without hesitation slipped it onto his finger. Suddenly, he was surrounded by familiar figures. His mother and father appeared first, their faces filled with love and pride. "We're so proud of you, Harry," said Lily, her eyes shimmering. "You're almost there, son," added James, beaming at him. "Next," Sirius materialized, wearing a cheeky smile. "You've got this, Harry. We're all with you." "What's death like?" asked Harry, awkwardly. "What comes next?" "In many ways, the next life is more exciting, son," laughed James. "There are many living realities and worlds existing at the same time, but only one land of the dead. Those with souls tainted by evil are banished to the void, while all other beings are blessed with entry into the undying lands. We've met Elrond, whose ring you now wear, Galadriel and Aragorn, and many other incredible people from history. So you have nothing to worry about, but right now you have a job to do, Harry," added Sirius, stepping forward and placing a hand on Harry's shoulder. To Harry's surprise, the hand felt solid and warm. Harry nodded. Before he could respond, another figure appeared at his side. He recognized the face of Cedric Diggory. Diggory gave Harry an encouraging smile. "The twilight is not the end. I have seen the dark night. It is a sign of new beginnings, Harry." "Thank you," whispered Harry, finding encouragement in his words. Harry then removed the ring and handed it to Ron. "Keep a hold of this." With the vial and the sword in hand, they left the office and made their way to the Great Hall. The sight that met them was heartbreaking. The surviving and injured defenders had gathered, some receiving treatment, others standing in grim silence. Dumbledore moved among them, healing the injured with the power of his elven ring. Swiftly, Harry approached Dumbledore and handed him the vial with the Horcrux and the sword. "Professor, we've got it." "Excellent work, you three," said Dumbledore, his eyes twinkling despite their grim circumstances. "We also managed to recover the real locket," said Harry, proudly holding it up for the astonished Dumbledore to see. But how?" stammered Dumbledore. "How did you manage to find it?" "It's a long story, Professor." Dumbledore scrutinized both Harry and the locket for a moment before nodding. He took both Horcruxes and the sword before handing them back. To Hermione, he gave the vial. To Harry, he returned the locket, and to Ron he gave the sword. "Hermione, when I give you the signal, open the vial. Only when I give the signal, do not forget," Dumbledore instructed. Surveying Hermione keenly, he did not fail to notice the change that had come over her. "Harry, at the same signal, I also want you to open the locket. You may need to use Parseltongue to do so. And Ron, if the opportunity presents itself, use the sword to kill the snake, Nagini. It is likely it's also a Horcrux, and only this sword can destroy it." The three of them nodded, acknowledging their headmaster's instructions. Shouldering the sword proudly, Ron had spotted his family across the hall and promptly left to join them. As Harry watched, he noticed Professor Gandalf enter the hall. The entire school had witnessed this mighty wizard's power, and his presence now drew the attention and admiration of all. Gandalf locked eyes with Dumbledore, and the two great wizards exchanged a brief nod before retreating to a quiet corner to confer. Harry and Hermione followed to join in the final council. "Albus," began Gandalf, frustration heavy in his voice. "The enemy conceals his strategy well. I have glanced into the Palantir but have failed to pierce the veil of secrecy. I cannot see what devilry he now brews. I am unsure of the enemy's next move and now fear something deeper is at work, something we might have long overlooked." "I fear you are correct, Gandalf, my friend." Dumbledore nodded gravely. "This is no chance assault, but design long in the making. News has reached me of the Ministry's fall. We should not expect reinforcements. None, at least, that can break the siege on the school." Gandalf's expression darkened. "So we are truly alone. Such was the assault on Minas Tirith," he muttered, more to himself, at last resigning himself to the inevitable path he must take. He may have to use the ring to ensure victory. A possibility that had been weighing heavily upon him. Such power was almost guaranteed to turn the tide, but at what cost? The last time he had used its full power, it had turned him to madness, the betrayal and killing of his friends and the dominion of Middle-earth. And although he had mastered the ring, it had been thousands of years since he had unleashed it. He stood abruptly. "The hour is almost up," he said loudly in his deep, rumbling voice, standing tall and calling for the attention of all gathered within the great hall. "The battle is far from over. Victory is at hand, if we can but for a little while remain unconquered." The hall grew silent as all eyes turned to Gandalf, searching for hope within his words. "Upon a long-ago field of battle, where the ripples of victory remain visible to this day," a great man once said, "I see in your eyes the same fear that would take the heart of me. A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship, but it is not this day. An hour of wolves and shattered shields, when the age of men comes crashing down, but it is not this day. This day we fight. By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand." None who heard his passionate words in that moment remained unmoved. They filled all with the hope they had lost and with a fierce longing to resume battle. "Our enemies believe us to be broken, but they underestimate the strength of our resolve," continued Gandalf. Beside him, Dumbledore stepped forward, echoing Gandalf's rallying cry. "It lifts spirit to see all gathered together. Remember, we fight not just for ourselves, but for all who cannot. We fight for our friends, our families, and the very world we cherish. Stand firm and know that each moment we resist, we grow closer to victory." Gandalf raised his staff, the light from its tip casting a warm glow over the defenders. "Prepare yourselves," he said. The time is upon us. We will face our foes with courage and with strength. Hold fast to hope, for as long as we breathe, there is a chance for victory." With these words, the emboldened defenders of Hogwarts readied themselves for the imminent battle, hearts and minds united in the face of overwhelming odds. The Great Hall buzzed with a renewed energy, for although the fighting had been fierce, casualties had so far been limited. The combined might and skill of their headmaster and Gandalf had done much to shield the school from the worst of the enemy's attack. Harry looked around for Ron and noticed him alone in a corner of the Great Hall, in intense conversation, though none was there to share it with him. Had the battle broken him? Had he lost his mind? Worried, Harry rushed over to him. "Ron, what's going on?" Ron turned to Harry, his face lit up with excitement. "You'll never guess who I spoke to, Harry. I spoke with Merlin." "You spoke with who?" asked Harry, bewildered. "You know, the legendary wizard with a massive great beard," Ron responded excitedly, holding up the ring with the resurrection stone. "You spoke to Merlin?" gasped an exasperated Hermione as she too joined them. "Yeah, well, he said I should speak to Salazar Slytherin," Ron said, his grin widening. "He said what?" Harry asked, not expecting the conversation to take such a strange turn. "You spoke with Slytherin?" said an envious-looking Hermione, her eyebrows shooting up in shock. "I did," Ron was grinning ear to ear. "He appeared right after Merlin, who by the way told me this sword." Ron held the sword of Gryffindor proudly above his head, was once owned by King Arthur. "Wait, King Arthur," said Harry, also grinning. "That's so cool." "Well, spit it out. What did he say?" cut in Hermione angrily, frustrated at Ron's inability to get to the point. "Oh yeah, sorry Hermione. Slytherin said there's something important hidden in the Chamber of Secrets. But we already know about the basilisk, Ron." Ron's expression grew serious. "That's what I thought, but he said that the chamber holds an even darker secret, and that's what the enemy wants." "But that makes no sense," said Hermione. "What else could possibly be hidden in there?" "More importantly," interjected Harry, "there are students hiding in there now." Ron continued. "He told me, within the chamber, there is a door like a gateway or bridge to another place, a void, within which there is an evil that has been bound for tens of thousands of years that is prophesied to be released before the end of the world. We can't let Voldemort or this Saruman anywhere near the Chamber of Secrets." His words hung heavy in the air for a few moments before Harry or Hermione responded. "What sort of evil?" asked Hermione, but Harry cut in, looking down at his watch. It was almost midnight. They only had 10 minutes before the attack resumed. "We have to act fast," he said quickly. "We can't let them get to whatever it is." "But how do we get the students out safely?" Hermione asked, her brow furrowed in thought. "We'll need help," replied Harry. "We need to tell Dumbledore and Gandalf about this. They'll know what to do." Hermione and Ron nodded, and the trio swiftly made their way back to the corner where Dumbledore and Gandalf were still deep in conversation. As they approached, Gandalf turned, his keen eyes assessing. "Professors," Harry began urgently, "we've just found out what Voldemort's after." "This is no random attack," added Hermione. "What do you mean, Potter?" "They're after something hidden in the Chamber of Secrets. Apparently, there's a door to a void containing an ancient evil that is prophesied to be released before the end of the world." "But how do you know this?" asked Dumbledore. "Ron used the ring to speak with Salazar Slytherin." "Salazar Slytherin?" repeated a surprised Dumbledore, but in his eyes was reflected deep concern. "If what you say is true, we may be in far greater peril than I'd originally anticipated." A fear spread across Gandalf's face, one that had been absent since his mighty contest with the Dark Lord upon the slopes of Mount Doom. An ancient evil bound for tens of thousands of years. "Albus, we must not allow Voldemort or Saruman to gain access to the chamber. If it is what I fear, then not even the power of the ring will save us." "What is it, Gandalf?" asked Dumbledore. I will not name it in hope that I am wrong. Dumbledore nodded and did not question further. Then we must act immediately, he said. Gandalf, you and I will continue to hold the outer perimeter of the castle. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, you must go to the chamber and ensure that it is protected. Take with you those who are willing. But, Professor, Hermione interjected, the students are hiding there. We need to get them out first. You must work together to evacuate them while we hold off the attack. Take them to the room of requirements. They will be safe in there. At that moment, the doors of the Great Hall burst open, and in walked Moody, Kingsley, and a group of seasoned witches and wizards from the Order and the Ministry. Their arrival was accompanied by Aberforth. Hogsmeade is overrun, he reported angrily. They burned down the Hog's Head. To his annoyance, Dumbledore smiled. Reinforcements were an unexpected but most welcome sight, bolstering the defense. The room buzzed with a renewed hope as the new arrivals took their places among the defenders. Glad to see you all made it, Dumbledore said, his voice carrying both gratitude and relief. We have much to discuss and little time. Gandalf nodded. The enemy grows bolder. We must be prepared for anything. Before they could delve into battle plans, the castle shook violently as an almighty explosion rocked the walls. Dust and debris rained down, and the defenders braced themselves. I'm ready, growled Moody, drawing his wand. We don't have much time, Dumbledore's voice cut through the chaos. You three go now. Protect the Chamber of Secrets. Without a moment's hesitation, Harry, Ron, and Hermione turned, sprinting towards the exit. Dumbledore and Gandalf rose from their seats, their presence commanding the attention of every defender in the Great Hall. To your positions, Dumbledore called out. Defend Hogwarts. And with that, Dumbledore and Gandalf led the defenders out to battle. Harry Potter and Gandalf the White. Chapter 10, A Clash of Titans. The enemy will show you no mercy, declared Gandalf, his voice booming above the din. They come to destroy you and your families. The time has come to show them our full might. We will meet their malice with death. His white robes gleamed with a brilliant light, standing with Dumbledore, Moody, McGonagall, and the other defenders of Hogwarts, assembled in a last stand against the onrushing hordes of the Dark Lord. The first wave of Death Eaters surged forward with terrifying speed, like a dark tide crashing against the defenders. Hold the line, Gandalf bellowed, his staff radiating a fierce, blinding light. For Hogwarts. Beside him, with a calm, almost casual flick of his wand, Dumbledore vaporized a masked Death Eater in a burst of flame. The surrounding enemies hesitated, confidence shaken, not wishing to be next to challenge a wizard as great and formidable as Dumbledore. Now he had demonstrated the callous willingness to kill. McGonagall, standing nearby, stared in shock. The kind and compassionate headmaster she had always known was now unveiled as a force of death and destruction. Despite her surprise, she felt glad they had a wizard like Dumbledore on their side. The battlefield was an explosion of noise. Spells ripping through the air, steel clashing, and the cries of the wounded blended into a blur of chaos. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A group of giants, towering and monstrous, thundered through the enemy ranks, charging straight for the defenders. The giants are highly magical creatures, Dumbledore shouted to Gandalf over the roar of battle. Their skin is thick and resistant to spells. They are extremely difficult to take down. No different to trolls then, muttered Gandalf, appearing unfazed as he raised his staff, pointing it at the foremost and largest of the giants. With a surge of power, a brilliant light erupted from its tip. The shockwave of the spell knocked both allies and enemies off their feet. The spell hit its mark, punching through the giant's massive chest, creating a gaping, bloody hole. Passing clean through, The spell continued on, exploding among the enemy ranks like a bomb, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. With a thunderous roar, Hagrid charged forward, clad in his new black obsidian armor. His massive sword gleamed as he swung it with all his might, severing the next giant's leg in a single stroke. The enormous limb crashed to the ground, followed by the giant himself, who crushed many beneath him as he writhed in agony. In the midst of the carnage, McGonagall spotted Snape. His mask had fallen off during the fight, revealing his pale, loathsome face. Her eyes narrowed with fury as she raised her wand, ready to strike him down for his betrayal. But just as she was about to strike, Dumbledore's hand gripped her arm, shaking his head. "No, Minerva," he said firmly, but did not offer explanation. He simply turned and continued fighting, executing a disarmed Death Eater with invisible knives, which slashed through flesh and bone. Dumbledore was making a statement here. Such savagery from the once benign old man seemed to be having the desired effect. Surrounding enemies began to falter, falling back and looking for weaker areas in the defense to attack, even though the main entrance was defended by fewer fighters. The battle appeared to be turning in their favor. Thousands of enemies lay dead upon the field, while the defenders had only suffered a few casualties. Yet they were still vastly outnumbered. For every one of the defenders, the enemy boasted hundreds of soldiers. Madame Pomfrey stood within the shelter of the entrance, reattaching severed limbs and mending broken bones. The enemy before them was regrouping, preparing to charge again, large orcs with long black iron swords in hand. "Albus!" screamed McGonagall, pointing in their direction. "We're going to be overrun." A cold fury passed over Dumbledore's face. Raising his wand in the direction of the enemy charge, he made a sharp whipping motion, conjuring a colossal stone wall from thin air. The charging enemies smashed with bone-shattering force into it. The sickening crunch of breaking bones and screams was heard along its entire 100-foot length. Dumbledore's wall granted the defenders a brief and much-needed break to catch their breath, thwarting the attack for the time being. "You but delay the inevitable," said Gandalf grimly, leaning on his staff as he too caught his breath. "Then let us do what we do best," Dumbledore replied, his voice steely. He pointed his wand at the wall, and with a wave, the stone structure came to life. It began to thrash violently, launching stones like bullets at the enemy, sweeping back and forth, crushing orcs as though they were nothing more than insects. The huge piles of bodies were growing all around them as the numbers of dead rocketed. Suddenly, a scream echoed from the side of the castle. "The Nazgul!" shouted Gandalf. "They call for aid." "Go, I will follow. The others will hold the entrance," responded Dumbledore. They ran as fast as their feet would carry them to reinforce the Nazgul. Turning the corner, they were surprised to see the Nazgul were not in fact being overrun as they had expected. Instead, they stood eerily still, glaring in the direction of the forest. Looking closely, they could see a small, shadowy group approach of around 30 hooded figures, led by one that sent a chill down Dumbledore's spine. Tall, pale, and gaunt. "Voldemort," snarled Dumbledore. "Saruman," Gandalf muttered, his grip tightening on his staff. "Be wary, Albus. His treachery runs deep." Beside him strode his top lieutenant, Bellatrix Lestrange, her eyes wild with madness, cackling as she led a contingent of Death Eaters. It became clear the Nazgul had raised the alarm to alert their master of a greater power approaching, one they would not be able to hold back. "He possesses your old wand, Albus, but do not falter or doubt yourself. You now possess a ring of power, sharpening your mind and strengthening your body. This is my fight. I will do what I must," responded Dumbledore, a steely note in his voice. "You focus on the others while I deal with Voldemort." Gandalf nodded grimly. "You struggle against mere fodder," Voldemort taunted, his voice dripping with malice as he stepped forward onto the blood-soaked battlefield. His eyes gleamed with dark triumph. "How do you expect to face me?" Dumbledore's grip tightened around his wand. The air between them crackled with power as Dumbledore and Voldemort faced off, each gazing at the other with deep loathing. Around them, the battlefield raged, screams of pain, the clash of steel, and the thunderous booms of powerful spells echoed across the grounds of Hogwarts. But in that moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, the greatest wizards of their age, preparing for a duel that would shape the fate of the world. "You toy with forces you do not comprehend, Tom." Voldemort's eyes gleamed with malevolent delight, his lips curling into a twisted smile. "You're a fool, Dumbledore," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You always were. Did you think you could truly challenge me? I, who am master of the Elder Wand, the most powerful wand in the world." Dumbledore's heart skipped a beat, but his expression remained calm and unreadable. "Draco," he murmured. "Yes," Voldemort spat, relishing the moment. The boy was weak. His end served its purpose. "The Elder Wand belongs to me now. You cannot hope to defeat me." "You've changed, Tom." "As have you," Albus spat Voldemort, a dark smile upon his lips. "You may have rediscovered your youth, but within me lives the spirit of a god." With a sudden, furious motion, Voldemort slashed his wand through the air. A jet of green light erupted from the tip, aimed straight at Dumbledore's heart. But Dumbledore was ready. With a flick of his own wand, he conjured a shimmering silver shield that absorbed the curse, deflecting it harmlessly into the ground. "You misunderstand the nature of true power, Tom," shouted Dumbledore over the chaos. The two wizards moved in a blur, their wands weaving intricate patterns as they cast spells with breathtaking speed. The air was filled with flashes of light, crackling energy, and the sound of spells colliding in midair. Fire met ice. Curses clashed with counter-curses, and the ground beneath them shook with the force of their magic. Voldemort lashed out with a torrent of black fire, its flames licking hungrily towards Dumbledore. But Dumbledore countered with a wave of his hand, calling upon the power of Vilya, the elven ring of air. A gust of wind erupted from the ring, swirling around him and extinguishing the flames in an instant. Voldemort's eyes narrowed in fury as he realized that Dumbledore would be a greater challenge than he'd expected, even with the Elder Wand. "He bears an elven ring. He will not tire," the voice of Saruman spoke from within him. At this, Voldemort intensified his assault, launching a barrage of spells, each one more deadly than the last. The battle raged on, neither wizard able to gain the upper hand. Voldemort's attacks were relentless, fueled by his desperation to destroy his rival. He wielded the Elder Wand with deadly precision, each spell a calculated strike meant to break through Dumbledore's defenses. But Dumbledore, with his long experience and the power of Vilya coursing through him, was a match for every assault. Voldemort's anger surged as the battle wore on, his frustration growing. Despite the power of the Elder Wand and the voice of Saruman whispering in his mind, Dumbledore continued to meet him spell for spell, countering every attack with an ease that stoked the Dark Lord's fury. Voldemort's response was a scream of pure rage. He thrust his wand forward, and the ground beneath Dumbledore erupted, jagged spikes of stone shooting up to impale him. But Dumbledore vanished in a whirl of silver mist, reappearing a moment later behind Voldemort and sending a shockwave of force that sent the Dark Lord stumbling. Each wizard was surrounded by an aura of power, the air itself humming with the force of their magic. They were titans, clashing with a fury that threatened to consume everything around them. Voldemort's eyes blazed with pure hatred and growing desperation. He had always viewed Dumbledore as a formidable adversary, but never as an equal. Now, With every passing second that Dumbledore withstood his onslaught, the seed of doubt began to take root in his mind. A doubt that Saruman's dark whisper sought to obliterate. "Strike harder, fool," the voice of Saruman hissed within Voldemort's thoughts, feeding his rage. "You have the power of a god. Use it." Voldemort's lips twisted into a snarl as he obeyed, channeling his anger into a vicious barrage of spells. Lightning crackled from his wand, the ground trembled with each strike, and the air grew heavy with dark magic. Finally, Dumbledore's defenses began to waver under the unrelenting force, his shield shimmering as it absorbed each blow. But Dumbledore yet held firm, though he could feel the strain. The power of Vilya bolstered him, sharpening his mind and strengthening him. Yet, even with the Elven Ring's aid, he could sense the dark tide rising within Voldemort. The malice of Saruman entwining with the Dark Lord's own twisted soul. Voldemort thrust his wand forward, and a wave of black energy surged towards Dumbledore, the sheer force of it cracking the ground as it advanced. Dumbledore raised his wand and conjured a barrier of light, but the impact still sent him skidding back, his feet digging into the earth as he struggled to hold his ground. "You cannot win," bellowed Voldemort. "I will tear you apart, piece by piece, until nothing remains." Gandalf, meanwhile, had been holding the line against the remaining Death Eaters. Casting a quick glance toward Dumbledore, he could see the strain on his friend's face, the toll of the battle beginning to show. But there was no time to assist him. His staff blazed with white light as he struck down foe after foe, each strike filled with the raw power of a mire. The Death Eaters, who had once feared nothing, now hesitated to approach the wizard clad in white. They fell back in terror, their confidence shattered by the sheer might of his magic. Bellatrix Lestrange darted toward Gandalf with a wild shriek, her wand slashing through the air as she sent a torrent of curses his way. Gandalf deflected them with ease, but the onslaught was relentless, forcing him to focus his attention on the enemies before him. "Foolish girl," admonished Gandalf. Meanwhile, Voldemort's attacks were growing even more ferocious. He was no longer merely fighting to defeat Dumbledore. He was fighting to humiliate him, to destroy every last vestige of hope that the headmaster represented. The ground beneath them cracked and splintered, dark energy swirling around Voldemort as he channeled the full might of his corrupted power. Dumbledore's breathing grew labored as he parried another of Voldemort's savage strikes. He could feel the weight of the Elder Wand pressing down on him, its dark magic seeking to overpower him. His own wand trembled in his hand as he deflected yet another attack, but the force of it sent him stumbling back. Voldemort advanced, his eyes gleaming with triumph as he sensed Dumbledore's weakening. "You see now, Albus," he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "You were always inferior to me. Your time is over." Just as Voldemort's cruel words echoed through the battlefield, he unleashed a ferocious surge of dark magic, the force of which sent Dumbledore crashing to the ground. The Elder Wand in Voldemort's grasp glowed with an ominous light, vibrating with the intensity of the malevolent power coursing through it. Dumbledore lay on the ground, his breath ragged, the once vibrant energy of Vilya dimming. He struggled to rise, but Voldemort was already upon him, his wand aimed directly at Dumbledore's heart. The gleam of triumph in Voldemort's eyes was unmistakable as he prepared to deliver the final, fatal blow. Avada Kedavra! Voldemort roared, the green light of the killing curse exploding from his wand, streaking toward Dumbledore with deadly intent. But in that critical moment, as the curse hurtled towards the prone headmaster, a blinding white light erupted between them. The killing curse collided with the light and dissipated harmlessly into the air. For a split second, the battlefield was bathed in the brilliant radiance that outshone the dark energy surrounding it. Out of the light stepped Gandalf, his eyes blazing with an otherworldly fury. His staff, now burning with a bright, searing white light blocked the curse, saving Dumbledore from certain death. Voldemort staggered back, momentarily stunned by the sheer force of the power now confronting him. "This ends now, Saruman," Gandalf declared, his voice resonating with the authority of ages. He stood between Dumbledore and Voldemort, the one ring now clearly visible on his finger, pulsing with power. "I will end you like I ended the last Dark Lord." Voldemort's shock quickly turned to rage. "Another fool who dares to stand in my way," he spat, though there was an unmistakable edge of uncertainty in his voice. He could feel the power radiating from Gandalf, a power that perhaps even rivaled his own. Gandalf advanced, his every step causing the ground beneath him to tremble. The light from his staff grew in intensity, the brilliance of it forcing even the Dark Lord to shield his eyes. "I will release you now from this world," said Gandalf, his voice calm. "You have defied the natural order for too long, and now you will face the consequences." But Voldemort, refusing to be cowed, unleashed a flurry of powerful curses. These were met with equal force. Gandalf's staff moved with blinding speed, blocking, deflecting, and countering every spell. The air crackled with energy as their magic collided, the ground beneath them buckling under the strain. "They will bring down the castle," thought Dumbledore, looking up to see the tower above them shake. Still recovering his strength, he watched in awe as Gandalf engaged Voldemort with a ferocity that belied his age. The One Ring's power coursed through Gandalf, amplifying his already immense abilities. Voldemort, for the first time, found himself truly outmatched. Gandalf's assault was relentless. He struck with his staff, sending shockwaves that rippled through the ground, each blow shattering the dark energy Voldemort tried to summon. With a sweeping motion, Gandalf called forth a torrent of fire, not the black flames of Voldemort's dark magic, but pure, cleansing fire that swept towards the Dark Lord with unstoppable force. Voldemort barely had time to raise a shield before the flames engulfed him, the intensity of the heat scorching the very air. He screamed in fury and pain, his shield barely holding as the fire pressed in, threatening to consume him. "You think you can defeat me?" Voldemort hissed through gritted teeth, his shield flickering under the relentless assault. "I am immortal." "Immortality has made you arrogant. It will be your downfall," responded Gandalf. "You may have cheated death, but you cannot escape the judgment of the living." With a final, mighty thrust of his staff, Gandalf shattered Voldemort's shield. The force of the blow sent the Dark Lord sprawling across the battlefield. Gandalf pressed his advantage, swiftly closed the distance between them, his staff raised high. In a desperate bid, Voldemort cast the killing curse once more, the deadly green light streaking towards Gandalf. But this time, Gandalf didn't deflect it. He absorbed the curse into his staff, the power of the One Ring bending the magic to his will. The green light vanished, swallowed by the white brilliance of Gandalf's power. At that moment, Dumbledore reached out telepathically to Harry and Hermione. "The locket, the vial, open them now." Within the castle, Harry, Ron, and Hermione had just finished the evacuation of the students from the Chamber of Secrets to the Room of Requirements. They now stood within the chamber, which they had barricaded in case the Dark Lord had managed to break through the castle's defenses. They would be a final defense against whatever evil the enemy sought to unleash within. They now stood in the eerie silence of the chamber, their hearts pounding with the weight of the task ahead. The massive stone serpents that lined the walls loomed ominously in the flickering torchlight, their unblinking eyes seeming to watch the trio's every move. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the anticipation of the battle raging above them. The trio had barely a moment to catch their breath when Dumbledore's voice echoed in Harry and Hermione's minds, urgent. Harry's hand flew to the chain around his neck, where the locket of Salazar Slytherin hung heavily. The Horcrux felt like a living thing, pulsing with dark magic. Beside him, Hermione pulled out the vial of silvery liquid, the memory they had extracted from Snape before his betrayal was revealed. "Ready?" Hermione asked, her voice trembling slightly. Harry nodded. "Let's end this." The locket and vial burst open, releasing two swirling black mists that writhed and twisted in the air. Two dark, menacing specter-like shadows rose out of each vessel and hovered for a moment before merging, becoming more defined and darker. Then, before either of them could raise their wand, the specter shot up through the ceiling. Above ground, Gandalf and Dumbledore watched as a black shadow, darker than the surrounding night, arose from the ground, engulfing Voldemort, who dropped his wand and fell to his knees, clutching his head as his body began to shake and convulse. Both spirits vie for dominance within a single vessel. Which will be victorious is not clear, said Gandalf, observing as Voldemort's appearance began to change. Eventually, another spirit began to emerge from Voldemort's trembling form. The shadowy specters that had been released from the locket and vial clashed violently within him, causing a rejection of Saruman's spirit also residing within. His body convulsed, shifting between forms, the dark magic tearing at his very being. Voldemort's face contorted in pain as he screamed, his voice a mix of his own and that of the dark wizard Saruman. His features twisted and morphed, flickering between the serpent-like visage he had crafted for himself and the more human appearance he had once possessed. Gandalf and Dumbledore stood back, their expressions grim. "Albus, the balance is shifting," Gandalf murmured, his eyes narrowing as he sensed the growing instability within Voldemort. "We must be ready for whatever emerges." Dumbledore nodded, his grip tightening on his wand. "It may not be Tom Riddle who stands before us when this is over." "Doubtful. A mortal cannot contend with the spirit of a mire," responded Gandalf. The shadow within Voldemort suddenly surged, and for a moment, his form stabilized. But then, a ghostly figure began to separate from his body, rising above him like a wraith. It was Voldemort, his spirit twisted and corrupted, yet still retaining a terrifying presence. "I will not be banished again." Saruman's voice echoed through the battlefield, filled with rage and defiance. "This world will bow to me." Voldemort, still on his knees, struggled to regain control. The Elder Wand, which had once been his greatest weapon, now lay forgotten on the ground as his focus shifted entirely to the internal battle raging within him. "He's losing," Dumbledore whispered. But Gandalf remained wary. Saruman's spirit is strong, but so is the darkness within Voldemort. It appears they are evenly matched. We must intervene, or risk something far worse than either of them alone. As if hearing Gandalf's words, the wraith-like form of Voldemort pulled back into his body, and Saruman was pushed out with a roar of defiance. Voldemort stood triumphantly, his form now restored to what it had been before Gandalf had meddled with the Time Turner. His features were no longer the twisted mess of two merged beings clinging to life, but rather a form Gandalf recognized, a powerful dark wizard at the peak of his strength. His eyes gleamed with a malevolent light as he took in the scene around him, reveling in his victory. The spectral form of Saruman, now a pale wraith, hovered nearby, his expression twisted with anger. Gandalf, who had rarely been caught off guard, found himself uncharacteristically shocked. "You are victorious," he admitted, his voice carrying reluctant respect. "I did not expect you to defeat a mire and reclaim your own body." Voldemort's laughter echoed across the grounds. "It has been decades since I have felt this whole," he sneered. "Much of my soul has returned to me." He flexed his fingers as if testing the power coursing through him, his eyes narrowing as he sensed his enemy's unease. Above them, the white, ghostly form of Saruman drifted over the grass. Dumbledore, ever vigilant, had not taken his eyes off the scene for a moment. It was then that he noticed something slithering through the grass, converging with the form of Saruman. It was Nagini, Voldemort's faithful serpent. Nagini, Dumbledore whispered. He raised his wand, ready to strike the snake down before it could cause further harm. But before he could utter the spell, Voldemort lashed out with a flick of his own wand, sending a bolt of dark energy directly at Dumbledore. The attack was swift, forcing the headmaster to defend himself rather than strike at the snake. The serpent, seizing the opportunity, slithered away, moving with alarming speed towards the chasm where the lake had once been. The water was gone, forming a defensive moat around the castle, leaving a gaping void that led deep into the earth. Too late, Gandalf and Dumbledore realized their mistake. The lake, now an empty chasm, was a direct path to the Chamber of Secrets, Voldemort's true objective. Dumbledore's voice rang out, not in speech, but in a telepathic call that resonated in the minds of those attuned to him. "Harry, Hermione," he called out urgently, his voice filled with fear. "Nagini is using the lake to get to the Chamber of Secrets. You must not let the snake get in, no matter the cost. Do you understand?" Deep beneath Hogwarts, in the dimly lit Chamber of Secrets, Harry and Hermione froze as Dumbledore's message reached them. Hermione's eyes widened in horror as she pieced together the implications. Ron, who did not have the telepathic link with Dumbledore, looked at them in confusion. "What's wrong?" "Nagini is using the lake to get into the Chamber of Secrets. Remember, Ron? Salazar Slytherin warned you. This was Voldemort's true goal. Within the chamber is a hidden door to avoid where is bound an ancient evil which will destroy the world. Above ground, the battle was nearing its climax. Gandalf and Dumbledore had cornered Voldemort, who now stood alone, his dark power waning without the twisted spirit of Saruman to strengthen him. His once formidable presence had diminished, and he was now kneeling, breathless, and at the mercy of the two greatest wizards of their time. "Your time is over, Tom. Why don't you try for some remorse?" Dumbledore said calmly, finality in his voice. Voldemort glared up at him, hatred burning in his red eyes, but there was fear there too. Fear that had been absent for so long. But beneath the ground, in the Chamber of Slytherin, Harry, Hermione, and Ron were facing a battle of their own. They stood tense, wands ready, as they listened to the soft slithering of Nagini somewhere in the echoing chamber. The sound was faint but unmistakable. The trio knew the snake was close. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the splashing of water and the heavy footsteps of Death Eaters entering through pipes from the lake. Shadows moved quickly against the walls, and Harry realized with a sinking heart that they were not alone. "We're surrounded," Hermione whispered fearfully. Death Eaters poured into the chamber, their wands raised and curses flew. Harry, Ron, and Hermione fought valiantly, casting spells in every direction to fend off the attackers. But it was hard to focus on the battle while also keeping an eye out for Nagini, whose presence they could feel but not see. The echoing chamber made it impossible to pinpoint the snake's exact location. In the chaos, Harry caught a glimpse of movement at the base of the enormous statue of Slytherin. His heart stopped as he saw the snake, her long, scaly body slithering into the gaping mouth of the statue. "She's in the statue," Harry shouted to his friends, but it was already too late. Before they could react, the entire chamber began to tremble. The statue of Salazar Slytherin shook violently, cracks forming along its ancient surface. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling as the ground beneath them quaked as if an earthquake had struck. The trio looked around in panic as parts of the chamber began to collapse, large chunks of stone falling dangerously close. "Get out! Now!" Hermione screamed, grabbing Ron and Harry's arms. They sprinted toward the lake exit, dodging falling debris and the curses of the remaining Death Eaters. The chamber was collapsing. They'd failed to stop Nagini, and they knew they had to escape before it buried them alive. Above ground, Dumbledore's eyes flicked upward toward the castle as it began to shake, distracted by the ominous rumbling. It was all Voldemort needed. Seizing the moment, Voldemort raised his wand, his eyes gleaming with malevolent triumph. Avada Kedavra, he hissed. The deadly green light of the killing curse shot straight at Dumbledore. But before the curse could hit its mark, a second spell collided with it mid-air, deflecting the killing curse harmlessly away. Dumbledore and Voldemort both turned in shock to see Severus Snape, his wand still raised from the counterspell, standing just a few feet away. "You!" Voldemort snarled, his face twisting with fury as he realized he had been betrayed. He raised his wand to strike Snape down, but before he could utter a spell, the ground beneath them rumbled again, this time more violently. They all looked up in time to see the tallest tower of Hogwarts, directly above them, begin to teeter and sway. With a deafening crash, the tower came down, stone and rubble raining from above. Dumbledore, Gandalf, and Snape managed to leap out of the way just in time, but in the chaos, Voldemort vanished, escaping into the shadows. The dust settled, and the three wizards, battered but alive, took a moment to catch their breath. But their respite was short-lived. From the direction of the lake came a sound, a deep, resonant groan. They turned to see something immense rising from the earth. An enormous black figure, far taller than any giant, clad in dark medieval armor, emerged from the lake. Its presence was overwhelming, exuding a malevolence not even Voldemort could rival. The figure stood still for a moment, surveying the world it had returned to after eons of imprisonment. "Morgoth," whispered a dazed Gandalf, his face pale with terror. "What is it, Gandalf?" asked a fearful Dumbledore, looking around distraught as his beloved school crumbled around them. "The first evil. Mightiest of the Valar. We cannot defeat him. Not even with the ring. What should we do then? Flee."
Thanks for joining us on this adventure. If you enjoyed the journey and are eager for more wild fan fiction, don't forget to hit that like button, share with your fellow fans, and subscribe for more episodes. And if you're as enchanted by the idea of Middle-earth meeting Hogwarts as we are, make sure to check out our series exploring this magical crossover. Your support brings these worlds to life. Until next time, keep the fantasy alive.